Chapter 383. Then, the galloping horses were jolted off the ground. The earth trembled fiercely. The mountain peak trembled. The trees on the mountain trembled violently. Jin Nangkai and Yu Chunglong fell down from their horses. They lay on the ground. Their complexions changed. From the looks of it, it was several times bigger than the previous 2 times. Then there was another dull explosion. Boom! Damaoji was in a mess. Not good. Not good. The big rocks are coming again. Everyone run. The mountain is collapsing. Oh no, mother. Mother, oh God. I have an 80-year-old mother at home. Let me go out alive. Fuck. Will that bitch in my hometown steal someone after she dies of old age? Fuck his ancestors. I snatched a little beauty home before I came here. I didn't have time to enjoy her. Similar screams and complaints were heard all over the place. The entire group was in chaos. Some of the bolder ones had already run out of the group and were running for their lives. Everyone knew that as long as they ran out of here, they would be fine. Immediately, some people ran out. There were also some who tried their best to retreat. However, the place was densely packed with people. Where could they retreat to? Fuck your mother. Don't push. Get back. Anyway, the old man is going to die. Why are you fucking pushing, brothers? Let's go. Everyone rushed forward. They didn't notice that Jin Nangkai and Yu Chunglong were still lying on the ground. They stepped on their bodies and crazily rushed forward. However, in this chaotic place, there was another huge boom. It drowned out all the sounds and movements. The mountain peak trembled. Boom, boom. The sound of the explosion became more and more intense. The rocks on the cliffs of the surrounding mountains began to fall down like raindrops. Boom, 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 boom. The sound of the explosion formed a dense line. It was getting closer and closer. Finally, a mountain fell down from the sky in front of everyone's horrified eyes. It fiercely smashed on top of everyone's heads. Boom! A deafening sound rang out, as if the sky was collapsing and the earth was collapsing. The mountain peak slammed into the mountain wall of the slanting valley. Everyone within a radius of several hundred feet fell to the ground at the same time without making a sound. Blood flowed out of their 7 orifices simultaneously. Then, like an elephant stepping into a wheat field, the mountain rumbled and rolled forward along the slanting valley. Wherever it went, broken limbs and body parts flew all over the sky. It unstoppably opened up a bloody alley and advanced with large strides towards the place where it had leaped into. Jin Nangkai and Yu Chunglong were 2 arrogant and unruly generals. They didn't even have the time to scream before they were crushed by the huge boulder and turned into 2 piles of blood and minced meat. As 2 of Great Zhao's 10 dragon and tiger generals, they had never achieved anything on the battlefield and had died in such an aggrieved manner under a large rock. It was truly lamentable. Moreover, they had been crushed to death in front of the million-man army they were leading. This made them even more speechless. When the later generations wrote about this period of history, they felt that they couldn't describe it. Therefore, they wrote a paragraph. Great Zhao's generals Jin Nangkai and Yu Chunglong led their million-man army to the north. The road was cruel. The people had no way to make a living. The heavens were furious. They were struck by lightning and struck by lightning. Thus, the matter was settled after these 2 had been punished by the heavens. The huge boulder naturally moved forward in an unstoppable manner. At this time, the entire slanting valley was completely submerged by the boulder flow. Even the first half of the slanting valley that hadn't suffered the calamity of the previous 2 waves was also hit by the boulder flow. The boulders were pouring down from the mountains with a rumbling sound. How powerful was this? Not even half a scream could be heard in the midst of such a loud noise. More than half of the slanting valley was submerged by the boulder flow. Sand, dust, gravel and soil fell down and buried the entire slanting valley. The mountain peak that had fallen down first bravely rushed forward for 30 li. Then it hit a corner with a bang. It trembled several times. Then it staggered to a stop. Dozens of people were crushed to death with a bang. The slanting valley was less than 300 feet wide. But this huge rock was 25 feet wide. So the rock was as wide as one could walk. And the entire Iron Cloud army was pushed forward in such a manner. In fact, the entire Iron Cloud army had been transformed into a part of the River of Blood. This boulder would have rolled all the way to the edge of the heaven-splitting mountain pass if it weren't for the small corner that was 30 li away. It was very bold and powerful. It was no wonder that it carried the resentment of being a bachelor. So, it got angry when it saw these men with wives and concubines. This chaos came and went quickly. In fact, everything came to an end in the time it took to brew a cup of tea. The silence between the heaven and earth was frightening. There was no more passage outside the heaven-splitting mountain pass. That was because more than half of the slanting valley had been buried. It was completely filled up, forming a new short mountain. The slanting valley was still a slanting valley. However, the terrain was much higher. Moreover, everything had happened inside the slanting valley. So, it didn't affect the heaven-splitting mountain pass outside the slanting valley. A lot of stones had fallen inside the heaven-splitting mountain pass, and many people had been injured. However, it couldn't be compared to the miserable state of the great Zhao army outside. Long Ao's hands and feet turned ice cold. He had helplessly sent Jin Nangkai, Yu and Cheng Long out. Then he had watched them leave. He hadn't even turned around when all of this had happened. Long Ao staggered and rushed over to take a look. Then he felt his vision go dark. He looked up and fainted. It was gone. It was all gone. Only half of the army that had been led by those two men remained here. The rest of the army had disappeared. The slanting valley had been filled up in front of Long Ao. There was nothing but rubble. Under the rubble, traces of blood could be seen flowing out slowly. A group of personal guards finally woke Long Ao up by pinching his chest and patting his back. But as soon as he woke up, he was immediately hit again. Blood spurted out of his mouth. He cried out in a heart-wrenching manner, "It's over. It's all over." Suddenly he thumped his chest and stamped his feet. Tears streamed down his face like rain. Perhaps even the initiator of this disaster hadn't thought that his actions would bring about such a glorious result. Great Zhao's 3 tiger generals had led 500,000 troops to the front line. They had changed their route to the heaven-splitting mountain pass. So, they had brought 1.5 million soldiers with them. They had rushed straight to the front of the heaven-splitting mountain pass. They had stationed 300,000 soldiers in front of it. Many troops had been stationed in the slanting valley for more than 50 kilometers. However, less than 1/4 of the troops had been stationed outside the slanting valley. The number of casualties of Great Zhao's army had exceeded 100,000 because of the collapse. Jin Nangkai and Yu Cheng-long had been leading their troops to retreat. So they had been smashed head-on. And they had been wiped out in one fell swoop. Moreover, the landslide had buried more than half of the slanting valley. And hundreds of thousands of people had been smashed inside with a plop sound. They had been buried alive. Great Zhao's army had become divided into 2 sections. They couldn't take care of each other. The people outside couldn't come in, and the people inside couldn't go out. And the worst part was, the troops inside didn't have any supplies. However, the troops outside had become like headless bees. They were in a mess. The 3 great generals were inside. And the highest-ranking officers in the troops outside were only deputy generals. Moreover, these deputy generals didn't have the opportunity to assume personal responsibility under the strong leadership style of these 3 great generals. However, they had encountered such an earth-shattering event. So they had become numb. Wu Kuangyun was inside the heaven-splitting mountain pass. He had finally seen what had happened. He would have been stupid if he hadn't seen what had happened. He was so happy that he jumped up and shouted on the spot, "Great General! Great General! Wu Du! Do you want to go out of the city?" Wu Yi's expression was solemn. "Stop. Uncle, I'll say it for you, okay?" Wu Kuangyun's liver and intestines felt uncomfortable as he heard this. He raised his hand and asked, "Do you want to say? Do you want to go out of the city and annihilate the enemy?" Wu Yi nodded his head vigorously. Wu Kuangyun said, "I'll say no." "Do you want to ask again, why don't you want to go out of the city?" Wu Yi nodded. Wu Kuangyun proudly said, "I'll say now. They've become a crippled army. They're done for if they don't fight. Do you want to ask again, why are they done for?" "I'll say now, they don't have food." "Do you want to ask again, why don't they have food?" "I'll say now, because of a landslide." "Do you want to ask again, ouch?" He hadn't finished speaking when Wu Yi ruthlessly kicked him. He was sent flying in the air. He flailed his arms and legs as he fell far away. Wu Yi snorted. His complexion was ashen. He turned around and walked away. "Motherfucker, you're not done yet." "I just stuttered a little." Wu Kuangyun crawled up while covering his buttocks. He flew into a rage. Wui, you're a deputy general. How dare you beat up the great general? Have you eaten a leopard's gall? Ah, I'll report you to the imperial court. I'll remove you from your post and banish you to the army, he roared. But Wui didn't look back. He didn't even pay attention to Wu Kuangyun. Wu Kuangyun was infuriated. He turned his head and looked at his bodyguard who was snickering. He scolded, "What are you laughing at? What are you laughing at? What are you laughing at? You're happy to see me get beaten up, aren't you?" "No, General." The bodyguard stood at attention. "No, or you don't dare." Wu Kuangyun fiercely asked. "No, I don't dare." Wu Kuangyun was satisfied. He patted the dust off his buttocks and swaggered away. He left with a burst of laughter behind him. Wu Kuangyun curled his lips and ignored them. He thought, I don't know what's going on, but it's a good thing. Long Ao will be defeated in one more day. I have to go and look for His Majesty. At this time on the hilltop, Chu Yang patted the dust off his body and jumped out of the pit. He twisted his waist and patted his buttocks. It seemed as if he had just done a trivial matter. He said in an incomparably relaxed manner, "The matter is done. We should also go. Wu Kuangyun will commit suicide if we don't send His Majesty to the heaven-splitting mountain pass." Chapter 384. The two king-level experts' hearts were still thumping because of the big movement this time. When they turned their heads, they saw that this first-grade king-level expert had already jumped up. His face was as calm as the clouds and wind. Such a calm temperament at such an age. Both of them cried out in their hearts, "What a freak!" Tai Butian had already sat up. Her sleeves were fluttering as she walked over. Her expression was calm and composed. It seemed that she didn't care about the traces of cracks under her feet. "Finished?" Tai Butian asked with a smile. "Finished." Chu Yang smiled. "I estimate that Great Zhao's army will suffer some losses this time." Tai Butian smiled. "Although it won't hurt them, they should be in a very difficult situation." Chu Yang laughed and said, "According to my estimation, there should be 10 or 20,000 people." 10 or 20,000? Tai Butian was taken aback. She said, "So many?" Chu Yang laughed mischievously and said, "Your Majesty, such a landslide is rarely seen in 10,000 years. It's absolutely possible." Both of them didn't know that the result this time was earth-shattering. How could a small landslide describe it? And the result this time was even more unimaginable to them. Even if someone were to tell them now, they would never believe that they had destroyed 100,000 of the enemy's troops this time. Not only that, but they also included two of the most famous generals in the continent, Jin Nangkai and Yu Cheng-long. "Let's go." Tai Butian smiled. In her heart, it was enough to cause some disturbance. Therefore, she didn't have much hope this time. "All right." Chu Yang laughed out loud and walked over. Suddenly, there was a surge in his dantian. Tribulation sword point suddenly emerged. It clearly sent out a thought to prevent Chu Yang from leaving. Chu Yang stopped his footsteps with a butterfly sound. Tribulation sword point was a common thing. Chu Yang was very clear about it. This thing was a greedy guy. It wouldn't come out on its own initiative if it didn't see any benefits. Tribulation sword point was actually very puzzled. If it could speak, it would be very surprised. "Go? Why do we have to go? We haven't gotten the good stuff yet. Why do we have to go? Don't tell me that you didn't ask me to dig up the mountain and put in so much effort to dig up treasures? If it wasn't for the treasure, why would we work so hard? Are we minors?" Chu Yang could feel the dissatisfaction and grievance of the sword tip. He couldn't help but smile bitterly and say, "How about this? I'll look around again. There seems to be something good here." Chu Yang was somewhat embarrassed. He touched his nose and looked very uncomfortable. After all, he was the one who had suggested to leave first. Now, everyone else had suggested to leave, but he had suggested to stay. How should he explain this? Shadow and Tai Butian had seen Chu Yang's ability to find elixirs. There must be some treasures in the vicinity if he has this kind of feeling. So they agreed without prior consultation. They were also very curious to see what this mysterious king of Hell Chu would find in this barren mountain this time. What would he find? The sword point of the Calamity Sword jumped in Chu Yang's arm. anxiously guiding the way. Chu Yang walked a few steps and discovered that he was walking in the direction of the severed Chunyang Peak. Chu Yang couldn't help but touch his head. He thought to himself, could it be that my luck has exploded? I accidentally destroyed a mountain peak, but I still found a treasure. The closer he got, the higher the terrain became, and the more cheerful the sword point of the Calamity Sword jumped. Tai Butian was walking behind him. She looked around and said with a smile, this mountain peak is very strange. This mountain is surrounded by verdant and lush forests. But this Chunyang Peak is the only place that is surrounded by rocks for dozens of miles. There isn't even a single big tree in sight. Minister Chu, it seems that the tool you made a moment ago has traveled a very long distance. Haha, you wouldn't have been able to topple this mountain in such a short time if it weren't for your superior martial power. The speaker didn't mean it, but the listener took it seriously. Chu Yang heard Tai Butian's words, and his whole body suddenly trembled. It seemed as if an electric current had passed through his body. His footsteps suddenly stopped. Let's go. Let's go. No wonder I felt that this place wasn't normal. So that's how it is. There isn't a single tree in the vicinity. In fact, there isn't even a single tree for dozens of miles around the Chunyang Peak. I walked for more than 40 miles and found withered trees. And the trees within the radius of hundreds of miles aren't flourishing. Why is this? There's only one explanation for this situation. There's something here that can absorb spiritual energy for its own use. It's precisely because of the existence of this thing that the other plants have the opportunity to absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. And it's making them wither. And a spirit herb that could have such a powerful ability could only be a legendary heavenly treasure, or a miracle herb or something like that. That must be it. Chu Yang's heart couldn't help but pound as he thought of this. He looked at the surrounding area. Not even a blade of grass grew for dozens of miles. And the trees within the radius of hundreds of miles had withered. And the trees only grew thicker and taller outside another big circle. This area had already exceeded the area where Chu Yang had found the Jade Snow Spirit Ginseng. In fact, it was at least twice as big. Could it be that it's a better elixir than the Jade Snow Spirit Ginseng? Chu Yang's heart throbbed. Tai Butian saw that he wasn't moving. So she asked curiously, why aren't you moving? Did you find it? No. Chu Yang calmed himself down. Then he walked forward. His target this time was obvious. It was the half-broken Chunyang Peak. Chu Yang walked closer and suddenly laughed out loud. Look, that thing is actually cut off from the middle. This TSK, I reckon this dear friend won't be able to use it in the future. This fucking thing is worse than the eunuchs in the palace. At least the eunuchs don't have anything. And they don't have any impulses. But this thing has been cut off from the beginning. It has all the functions but it can't be used. Tai Butian suddenly became angry. Are you here to look for elixirs or to act like a rogue? The two shadows didn't know whether to laugh or cry as they watched Minister Chu spouting nonsense. Their hearts were full of helplessness. The ignorant are truly fearless. This guy wouldn't dare to be so presumptuous if he knew that Her Majesty was actually a woman. It's simply unbearable to look at. Minister Chu laughed as he finally arrived in front of the Chunyang Peak. It looked even more majestic and precipitous up close. Chu Yang stroked the broken part with a lewd smile on his face. He then said with emotion, I'm sorry. I was careless and cut you off. Tai Butian's face darkened. She turned her head and took a deep breath. She felt that her mind was clear. She couldn't help but say, I've never climbed a mountain. But I've heard that it's very difficult to breathe on the top of a mountain. This mountain is so high. So it must be even more difficult to breathe, right? But it's not difficult to breathe here. What's going on here? Could it be that there's an elixir here? The expressions of the two shadows shook. Their countenance suddenly changed. What Tai Butian had said was common knowledge. But they hadn't felt anything since they had come up here. So they had neglected this point. So it seemed that the thing on this mountain wasn't just a treasure. In fact, it should be extraordinary. The tip of the sword trembled even more fiercely. It pointed directly at the broken part of the Chunyang Peak. Chu Yang took a deep breath and jumped up. Suddenly, an extremely tired voice sounded in his consciousness. From one side, diagonally down people. Chu Yang was startled. Petal spirit? What have you been doing all this time? I called out to you but you didn't respond. Sword Spirit said in a weak voice, You're still talking. You went crazy and went head-on with the enemy. You were about to be smashed into pieces. But you fainted. Would you still be alive if I didn't help you block the attack? Unfortunately, you exhausted the spiritual power that I had accumulated for such a long time. So I had no choice but to fall into a deep sleep, so that's how it is. Chu Yang was somewhat embarrassed. Well, I also felt strange about that night's matter. Why did I go crazy? I didn't even try to dodge. The Heavenly Lady has absorbed some of the power of the mysterious ice jade ointment these days. So she has recovered 1 point. Otherwise she wouldn't have woken up, Sword Spirit said. You should hurry up and get the elixir. I'll rest first. Wait, what's inside? You should know about this, right? Chu Yang asked. What else can there be on the Chunyang Peak? Sword Spirit said in a bad mood. You know that all the things that are naturally formed in the world have its name. So they can't be aimless. After he finished speaking, he disappeared without a trace. Chu Yang had a belly full of questions to ask him, but he had disappeared after a while. He had no choice but to touch his nose. Then he jumped down from above. He wielded the Calamity Sword on one side of the Chunyang Peak and cut down with a schwa sound. Tai Butian looked on helplessly as Chu Yang's seemingly ordinary cyan steel sword cut into the big rock as if he was cutting tofu. She couldn't help but be shocked. After a short while, Chu Yang took out a big square rock and put it aside. Then he took out another one. The two shadows skillfully helped. They knew that Chu Yang must have found something. However, they didn't have the slightest bit of greed in their hearts. They only had a simple thought. We must help him take out this treasure in its entirety. They had already taken a big advantage of Chu Yang with the Vitality Spring Water today. This kindness was enough for them to be at his beck and call. So how could they have the nerve to ask for a share of the loot? Besides, this was discovered by Chu Yang. Chu Yang had dug it out himself. Could it be that he wanted the elixir just by moving the rock? How could there be such a thing? Chu Yang dug down 10 feet. A big pit had already appeared on the ground. Chapter 385. Chu Yang's spirit was lifted. Looks like it's almost there. Sword Spirit said 10 feet. Now it's only 10 feet, but this is already happening. Doesn't this mean that this treasure is very awesome? When Chu Yang threw out another big stone, the two figures who were guarding the entrance of the cave clearly felt that something was wrong. The bottom of this big stone was very soft. It was so soft that it could be poked with one's finger. Moreover, it was emitting a strange heat. About an inch at the bottom of this stone had turned dark red. It was this dark red color that was emitting a copious amount of heat. This kind of heat made one feel comfortable all over. Just as Chu Yang was about to continue, there was a sudden vibration in his consciousness space. The Sword Spirit appeared again and said in a hurried voice, Be careful. Everything within a radius of 30 feet will be put into the tribulation space. Huh? Chu Yang asked. Don't worry. Listen to me. Sword Spirit's dispirited spirit was suddenly lifted. His voice trembled as he sighed. I really admire your luck. You can do this. I'm really speechless. My luck is very good? Chu Yang frowned and asked. It's not just very good. The Sword Spirit was a bit speechless. When you first came up, you found the sword tip and obtained a part of the 7 shades cold chi. This was enough for you to not be injured under certain circumstances. Then, when you obtained the second fragment of the Calamity Sword, you obtained the Vitality Spring Water as a martial master. Moreover, it was a full spring. This spring water was supposed to disappear when we took out the second part of Tribulation Sword. But we kept it in the Tribulation space, which became an endless treasure trove. Then when you chased after the enemy, you got a small part of Jade Spirit Ginseng. The sword point stole its medicinal power. This is very strange. Chu Yang said, Jade Spirit Ginseng? Yes, Diwuqing Rose Jade Spirit Ginseng is only 3,000 years old, and there are only 2 thin pieces. But don't forget that this Jade Spirit Ginseng is very young. It's not qualified to be a real Jade Spirit Ginseng, but it's one of the most miraculous medicines in the world. It's like a newborn tiger. Even a rabbit can deal with it. But no one can deny that it's a tiger, right? Sword Spirit explained in more detail. Understood, Chu Yang said. But it was this little bit of jade spirit ginseng's medicinal power that combined with the other medicinal powers to form the embryonic form of the heavy pill. It was this embryonic form of the heavy pill that stimulated the Calamity Sword's desire for large spirit herbs. It was equivalent to opening a person's spiritual wisdom. Do you understand? In other words, if you don't encounter these things, the Calamity Sword won't be in such a rush. That way, even if the great medicine is right in front of you, you might miss it. But now it's no longer possible. Then you found the mysterious ice jade paste. Moreover, it's a mature mysterious ice jade ointment. Sword Spirit exclaimed in admiration. This is a 10,000-year-old mysterious ice jade ointment. The price was simply impossible to estimate. Furthermore, it was one of the great medicinal herbs. Your good fortune has come one after another till today. I was sleeping, relying on the cold energy of the mysterious ice jade ointment to nourish my soul. But when you approached here, a burst of mysterious yang qi rushed in. Yin and yang harmonized and I suddenly woke up. Then I discovered that you actually found this treasure. What the hell is this thing? Chu Yang interrupted the sword spirit's chatter. He was somewhat impatient in his heart. Didn't you say that you were weak? Didn't you need to recuperate? Why did you come out and chatter? The mysterious yang jade is everywhere in the radius of 30 feet, and 30 feet below. Mysterious yang jade, you idiot. Sword Spirit said excitedly. Mysterious yang jade? What's its use? Chu Yang asked. You dig it out first, Sword Spirit said impatiently. Chu Yang snorted, and drew a big circle with the Calamity Sword. But he didn't get enough time to stretch out his hand, and the Sword Spirit impatiently put this big piece of mysterious yang jade into the Calamity space. Then Chu Yang saw that the mysterious yang jade, and the mysterious jade inside the Calamity space had been arranged in a strange circle by the Sword Spirit. And the Sword Spirit sat down cross-legged in this strange circle. Pieces of mysterious yang jade were extracted, and the Sword Spirit accepted them all with a smile. Then the strange circle inside the Calamity space also became bigger and bigger. Finally, the last piece of mysterious yang jade was put into the Calamity space. Then Chu Yang's mind moved and he took out 3 pieces. The Sword Spirit was furious. He quickly took them back and said, "What are you doing?" He looked like an old hen protecting her chicks. In fact, he had almost risked his life to fight Chu Yang. What's wrong? Chu Yang was somewhat speechless. He pointed at the mysterious yang jade that was piled up like a mountain in the Calamity space, and said, "You have so much. Take out some of it. How can someone help us? Besides, I didn't take out much. You can't be so stingy, right? Not even a drop." Sword Spirit firmly controlled the Calamity space. He frowned and said, "Who asked them to help us? Can't we do it ourselves?" What a joke. Chu Yang felt a headache. He realized that he couldn't take out anything since the Sword Spirit was controlling the Calamity space. So, he helplessly said, "Just this once." Just this once? Sword Spirit suspiciously looked at him. Just this once. Chu Yang nodded heavily. Alas. It's a pity. This mysterious yang jade is a genuine treasure. The Sword Spirit reluctantly looked at the 3 pieces of mysterious yang jade in front of his eyes. Then he put down 2 of them. Then, he broke off the smallest piece of the mysterious yang jade into a palm-sized piece. Then he divided this small piece into 3 smaller pieces, and threw them out. Take them. Chu Yang almost fainted. I've seen stingy people. I've seen stingy people. But I've never seen such a stingy person. You almost poked a mountain yourself. But, you're still reluctant to give a palm-sized piece of stone to someone else? You can't be stingy to this extent, right? However, Sword Spirit was already in a daze. He looked as if he was rejecting Chu Yang and said, "Do you want them or not? You won't even have these if you don't want them." Chu Yang forced a smile. "You're ruthless. Why aren't you working?" Sword Spirit roared, "Mysterious yang jade essence is below the mysterious yang jade. It's on the same level as the mysterious ice jade paste. It's one of the great miracle medicines. Why aren't you getting them? What are you waiting for?" What? Chu Yang was gobsmacked. In fact, he almost stuttered. He had thought that he would be overjoyed if he had obtained so much mysterious yang jade this time. But he hadn't expected that there would be such a pleasant surprise. He hastily turned around and saw that the mysterious young jade was gone. Instead, the ground was flat. However, there was a place that was emitting a pink luster. Chu Yang approached it and gently picked it up with his sword. Suddenly, a thin thing was lifted up by him. This small thing quickly became smaller after it left the ground. Then it melted in the air. Below it was a small ball of pink stuff. It was squirming on the ground. Its appearance was similar to the mysterious ice jade essence. However, it was emitting an incomparably warm aura. It seems that this is the mysterious young jade essence. Chu Yang's mind moved, and this small piece of mysterious young jade essence entered the tribulation space. Sword Spirit exclaimed in pleasant surprise. He then put the mysterious young jade essence into the vitality spring. Then he gasped for breath and happily said, "Very good. The yin and yang in the tribulation space will be harmonized this time, so there won't be any problem. Moreover, my spiritual power will increase rapidly after the yin and yang harmonize. So, I'll be able to help you even more." Eh? Yin and yang harmonize? Chu Yang suddenly recalled the story that he had just told. "So," he said in surprise, "don't tell me that the story about the worldly bachelor is true?" "What worldly bachelor?" Sword Spirit looked at him in bewilderment and said, "What kind of nonsense are you talking about?" Chu Yang forced a smile. He had no choice but to repeat the story again. Then he said, "Isn't it true?" "It's true." Sword Spirit looked at him in a speechless manner. The mysterious young jade essence has a very strict condition. That is, a lone peak must stand tall in the blue sky. It must be covered by the morning sun for 10,000 years. It must be connected to the pure yang energy of the blue dome of heaven. Do you understand? At the bottom of this mountain is the place where the dragon veins intersect. After a long time, after 10,000 years, this kind of heavenly treasure will slowly appear. So that's how it is. Chu Yang recalled the story. He couldn't help but laugh out loud. Then he suddenly thought of something. Doesn't that mean that this place will produce heavenly treasures in the future? After all, we haven't destroyed these dragon veins. That's for sure. Wait patiently. It will appear after 10,000 years. Sword Spirit sneered. The Tao factory opens after 10,000 years. In other words, this kind of thing will take at least 10,000 years to take shape. I'll wait. Chu Yang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Damn it. Where will I be buried after 10,000 years? Even if I want to worship my ancestors, I won't be able to find it, right? So I'll wait? Chu Yang jumped out of the ground with a bang. He had been fiddling with the ground a while ago, so it was completely dark. So the people above couldn't see what he was doing. The three of them were happy to see him jump out. "You came out? Are you all right?" Tai Butian asked. "I'm fine," Chu Yang replied. "That's good. Let's go." Tai Butian took the lead to turn around and leave. The two shadows smiled warmly and followed behind Tai Butian. They wouldn't ask Chu Yang what he had obtained. After all, it would only make Chu Yang feel embarrassed. This treasure was Chu Yang's. So how could there be any dispute? "Aren't you going to ask me what kind of treasure I've obtained?" Chu Yang asked in a puzzled manner. "It's yours. No matter what you've obtained, it's yours." The shadow patted Chu Yang's shoulder and smiled warmly. "So we won't ask." Chapter 386. Chu Yang flipped his wrist and said, "Now these belong to you three." Looking at the three thin pieces of jade in his palm, he said awkwardly, "Cough cough, they are a little small, but cough cough, there weren't many dogs to begin with." Chu Yang felt a little guilty when he said this. "They are not that big, they are not even as big as a mountain. But what should I say? Should I say that the sword spirit of my calamity sword is stingy and won't give it to you?" However, the three people opposite him were stunned. Under the sunlight, the three pieces of pink jade in Chu Yang's palm emitted a bright red luster, as if they were about to melt under the sunlight. They slowly emitted a dense mist. A burst of warm aura suddenly enveloped the three people. "Mysterious young jade!" Shadow exclaimed. Then his eyes widened. His 4 eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets at the same time. No wonder this place is barren. No wonder this mountain peak is called Pure Yang Peak. Pure Yang, so this is it. It turns out that there is such a shocking treasure here that contains the power of Pure Yang. Mysterious young jade. Shadow's eyes were brimming with tears. Such a treasure is not a legend. It really exists in this world. Tai Butian didn't know what mysterious young jade was, but seeing the reaction of the two shadows, she knew that this small piece of jade was extraordinary. This jade. His Majesty can have it, but we can't. Shadow's eyes were fixed on the mysterious young jade in Chu Yang's hand as he said with difficulty. Why? Chu Yang asked. An ordinary man is innocent, but treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime. Shadow sighed. We're not like you. One of you is carefree and can go anywhere you want, while His Majesty is the ruler of a country. He rarely comes out. With such a treasure on him, there won't be any problems. But the two of us have clans, and we have to go back to our clans every once in a while. Shadow's expression was somewhat bitter. There was one thing he didn't say. As long as our clans know that we have such a thing, they will definitely take it back to our clans. The two of us are second-grade martial kings. This is good, but such strength is not valued in our clans. What's more, the two of them were already so old, and their future development wasn't favored by their families. Otherwise, why would he be sent to the lower three heavens? Can't you just keep it to yourself and not say anything? Chu Yang asked in surprise. I've already taken it out. Do you want me to take it back? Quo. The two shadows hesitated for a while and finally decided, how about this? We shouldn't have asked for it. Since you've said so, then let us husband and wife take one. Quo, as he spoke, he picked up the smallest and thinnest piece. Then he handed the largest piece to Tai Butian, but insisted that Chu Yang take back the other piece. For us to be able to take such a small piece is already a blessing to our ancestors, and a great advantage of you. Both shadows were resolute. As for Tai Butian's piece, both of them felt that it was only right. For you, her martial path was ruined, and she gave up the most precious thing as a woman. It's only right for her to take a piece of mysterious yang jade from you to nourish her body. Your Majesty, this piece of jade is called mysterious yang jade. You can wear it to nourish your body and even your divine soul. Moreover, it has the effect of warming your skin and maintaining your appearance. You're busy with state affairs and have to deal with thousands of affairs every day. It's inevitable that you'll be tired. But as long as you have this mysterious yang jade, you'll be immune to all kinds of diseases. Your spirit will always be full, and you'll never feel tired. Moreover, it will never harm your body. Quo. Shadow solemnly exhorted, Your Majesty, this piece of jade must never be seen by others. In the future, this piece of jade can also be a national treasure. Quo. The heirloom of the country. Tai Butian was holding the piece of jade in her hand, feeling the warm aura. She was playing with it lovingly. When she heard Shadow's words, she was immediately shocked. National treasure? What kind of treasure could be a national treasure? As the ruler of a nation, how could Tai Butian not be clear about it? Only those heaven-defying treasures would be regarded as national treasures. I'll let this piece of jade accompany me forever. Tai Butian raised her head and said solemnly. These words had a profound meaning. At least, the two shadows felt that they had a profound meaning. However, Chu Yang didn't feel anything. The two shadows sighed in their hearts when they saw the expressions of the two people. Such a good marriage. Why does the man have someone else in his heart, and the woman has a heavy burden on her shoulders? One has feelings and the other has misgivings. The other doesn't know anything about it. There are such strange emotional entanglements in this world. The four people went down the mountain. The four of them walked until the evening lanterns were lit. Then they crossed the mountains and arrived at the heaven-splitting mountain pass from another direction. Wu Kuangyun was burning with anxiety. That was because Long Ao was still outside the pass. It wasn't that he didn't want to move but that he couldn't. There was a mountain behind him. He was caught in such an awkward situation. He really wanted to cry but had no tears. Hundreds of thousands of people will climb the mountain if we want to retreat. As for riding a horse or taking a carriage, isn't that a fantasy? But hundreds of thousands of people will climb the mountain. Wouldn't Wu Kuangyun get annihilated if he comes out of the pass? Long Ao wouldn't dare to take his own head as a joke even if he had the guts to do so. Moreover, what would he do if he was lucky enough to climb the mountain, and then a huge boulder fell down? That's really hard to say. Therefore, Long Ao could only endure. Your Majesty! Your Majesty! Wu Kuangyun received the report. and hurriedly came out to greet him. He was so excited that he almost cried. He wiped his eyes and was inexplicably moved. "You're finally back." "I'm about to commit suicide." Tai Butian smiled comfortingly and said, "What's the hurry? I'm all right." How's the situation inside the pass?" Kuo winked with a frown. "Now, the situation is very good." Wu Kuangyun's words left Tai Butian dumbfounded. "Very good." "Yes, Waha. Today I old Wu am very excited. A mountain fell down from the sky and smashed these bastards to death." "Wah." Wu Kuangyun grinned. "Even if a mountain falls down, it can't smash them to death, right?" Tai Butian frowned. "This Wu Kuangyun is exaggerating, right? But this mountain can move, Your Majesty. This mountain tumbles along the slanting valley. Moreover, the mountains on both sides of the slanting valley are shaken by the fall of this mountain. Hehe, that scene is spectacular. I heard that even Jin Nangkai and Yu Changlong were smashed to death. Great Zhao's casualties are more than 100,000. Quo. Wu Kuangyun was so excited that his face turned red. "Now, 100,000. 100,000, Your Majesty." Kuo winked with a frown. 100,000, Your Majesty. Tai Butian's forehead was covered with black lines. "Your Majesty has 100,000. What's the value of that? 100,000 emperors of a country." However, he also knew that Wu Kuangyun was extremely excited and incoherent, so he didn't take it to heart. "Now go in and see." "Now." Tai Butian waved his hand. Wu Kuangyun had already arrived in front of Chu Yang. He patted Chu Yang's shoulder with his big hairy palm. "Now hey, little, do you remember me, Great General Wu?" Quo. Chu Yang raised his eyebrows. "Now, I'm going to feed aphrodisiac to the warhorses." Quo. Wu Kuangyun was stunned for a moment. Then he angrily said, "Motherfucker. Now you've just met, and you've already begun to expose my scars." He turned his head and was about to flip out. But he found that Chu Yang had already walked far behind Tai Butian. Wu Kuangyun caught up with them. He was about to show his power when Tai Butian turned around and looked at him. Then he whispered in a dignified manner, "Now don't be rude to Minister Chu." Quo. His voice was so low that only Wu Kuangyun could hear him. Wu Kuangyun's mouth gaped open in shock. "Minister Chu? King of Hell Chu? This guy is King of Hell Chu?" Wu Kuangyun recalled the rumors about King of Hell Chu that had spread throughout the entire Iron Cloud. Then, he compared that terrifying character with this youngster in front of him. Wu Kuangyun tried hard to match the two. But, he found that he couldn't accept this seemingly absurd fact. He opened his mouth to speak. But, he saw Tai Butian's stern gaze looking at him. It was as sharp as a knife. "His Majesty obviously doesn't want me to reveal King of Hell Chu's identity." Wu Kuangyun tactfully shut his mouth. But, he was thinking in his heart. His Majesty doesn't want King of Hell Chu's identity to be exposed. So why is he telling me? The heaven-splitting mountain pass was in a mess along the way. Collapsed houses and city walls were everywhere. Tai Butian couldn't help but sigh. It was really dangerous. If this wasn't the heaven-splitting mountain pass, I'm afraid that any other city would have turned into a pile of wasteland. Tai Butian climbed the city wall and looked at the lone army outside the city. He looked at them for a long time with his sharp eyes. Then he said, "Now, Minister Chu, the 500,000 soldiers and horses here will be under your command from now on." Quo. Chu Yang was stunned. "Now me?" Quo winked with a frown. "Now. Yes, it's you." Quo. Tai Butian trusted him and said, "Now, I believe that you can end this war as soon as possible." Quo. Chu Yang looked outside the city and said, "Now good." Quo. Wu Kuangyun had been following behind him. He finally understood. His Majesty wants King of Hell Chu to command the army. That's why he told me his identity. Humph humph, do you think it's so easy to command the army? A genius isn't equal to a commander. Wu Kuangyun cursed in his heart. Then he heard Tai Butian say, General Wu, you're in charge of assisting Minister Chu. You must remind him at any time." He looked at Wu Kuangyun indifferently. "Now do you understand?" Quo winked with a frown. "Now. I understand. I understand. Now." Wu Kuangyun nodded like a chicken pecking rice. Chu Yang's black robe covered his entire body. It covered his entire face. He held the first military meeting with King of Hell Chu's signature image. In addition, he deliberately emitted a trace of 7 shades cold energy. This made the commander's tent look like an ice cave on this hot summer day. Everyone's entire body was emitting cold air. Several valiant generals of the army weren't convinced at first. They wanted to stir up some trouble. But they felt as if a poisonous snake had crawled up their backs as soon as they met King of Hell Chu's gaze. They felt a chill run down their spines, and their scalps went numb. Their hearts melted like snow under the scorching sun. Chapter 387. Everyone was shocked. This minister is very direct. He went straight to the point. Has anyone led an army like this since ancient times? They saw the minister flipping through a small booklet in his hand. The bodyguard standing next to him squinted his eyes and almost laughed out loud. The handwriting on this booklet looked like a turtle's crawl. It was very ugly. It was General Wu Kuangyun's handwriting. This was exactly what Chu Yang had forced Wu Kuangyun to write about his understanding of the various generals and their respective characteristics during the 2 hours he had spent on world-defying stage heavens. These people were Wu Kuangyun's old subordinates. So he obviously knew their strengths like the back of his hand. Chu Yang had to rely on this to make arrangements for the generals. This battle wouldn't be difficult to fight against the exhausted soldiers outside the city. Tai Butian's intention was to let Chu Yang use this battle to train his troops. Wuxia. Chu Yang frowned and said, Emo? General is here. Wu Yi stood up straight with a swoosh. He looked like a tough soldier, but his serious stuttering had greatly reduced his image. The generals burst into laughter. Chu Yang was dumbfounded. He raised his head and said, Are you the deputy commander? Emo? Wu Yi's mouth was foaming. Wu Kuangyun hurriedly translated. Reporting to the supreme commander, he wanted to say, I am. Oh. Chu Yang looked at the roaring laughter below. Suddenly his face changed. He slammed the table. What are you laughing at? The generals were stunned. What are you laughing at? It's funny, isn't it? Chu Yang looked at them fiercely. Do you think it's funny that he stutters and you don't stutter? Are you laughing at your own brother? Huh. You guys are really united. Is stuttering funny? Speak. He slammed the table heavily. There was complete silence. Wu Yi. Yes. I order you to immediately lead 50,000 elite soldiers out of the city to challenge. Pay attention. After the battle, you don't need to cause a lot of casualties. You only need to mobilize the enemy's troops. Then you immediately lead the troops back. Understood. Wu Yi straightened his chest. Go. Yes. Wu Yi received the order and strode away. Then Chu Yang called out the names of several generals. Basically, every 2 hours 50,000 soldiers would go out of the city to harass them. Yes, it was harassment. Long Ao was in for a tragedy. He was now secretly letting the army clean up the collapsed mountain. As long as they could make a slope that could allow horses to gallop up, they would be able to leave this place. Of course, this work was deliberately concealed and was extremely secretive. Moreover, it looked like it was about to be completed. At this time, the city gates suddenly opened with a sound. Following that, a group of people surged out like a tide. The leading general shouted under the moonlight, Long Ao, do you dare to fight with me? Long Ao was infuriated. What a bastard, coming up to challenge at such a critical juncture, and even coming up with an ending. However, he had no choice but to fight, because the other party was already charging over. In case they rushed into the camp, he wasn't afraid of disturbing the army. But he was afraid that the other party would find out about his movements. Even if one of them managed to escape, Wu Kuangyun would be prepared. Then his army would be annihilated. Therefore, Long Ao had no choice but to hurriedly send troops to resist. Who would have thought that this stuttering general would throw out a sentence after a round of fighting? Ming. Tomorrow? He hadn't even finished speaking when his shadow disappeared. Long Ao smashed his cup in the commander's tent. Another 2 hours passed and another wave came. This wave broke through the vanguard of Great Zhao's army with a loud bang. They immediately retreated after killing and setting fire. Another 2 hours passed, and another wave came. Long Ao flew into a rage. He was at his wits' end. The night passed in such a state of high tension. Dawn broke. Long Ao was pacing back and forth in the commander's tent. Suddenly a loud noise came from outside. It seemed that soldiers were causing trouble. The quartermaster came to report, "Supreme Commander, we don't have any food." "No food?" Long Ao's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. "Didn't we tell them to divide the rations for 1 day into 3 days? Where are we going to get food at this time?" But this is a high-intensity battle. In addition, we haven't slept all night. The soldiers are..." The quartermaster was also helpless. They had fallen into this situation. All the military supplies were in the rear. He was the quartermaster, so he didn't have anything in his hands. The only provisions they had after they had been intercepted here were the 3 days' rations that the soldiers had carried with them. The provisions weren't distributed under a unified jurisdiction. They were all in the hands of the soldiers. So, who could bear it if they got hungry? 5 days had already passed. So what else could be left? The noise outside was getting louder and louder. "They won't let us eat. How can we fight if we don't let us eat?" "That's right. Do you want to win the battle on an empty stomach? We want to eat." This group of soldiers was a rough bunch. Only a few of them were literate. In other words, those who could recognize their own names were highly educated people in the army. They had always been like this. "Don't have food? Look for an official. We don't care where this is or how critical the situation is. Anyway, we can't go hungry." Long Ao frowned. He lifted the curtain and rushed out in big strides. "What are you shouting about?" There was a moment of silence. Then someone shouted, "Marshal, we want to eat." With someone taking the lead, everyone's courage grew. They shouted together, "Marshal, we want to eat." Long Ao's cheeks twitched. He said angrily, "No food? If you don't have food, you won't eat horse meat? There are so many dead horses piled up there. Aren't those eaten?" The soldiers cheered, "Eat horse meat, eat horse meat." They left one after another. Then there was another conflict at the dead warhorses. Which cavalry didn't treat their warhorses as their lives? When their warhorses died, they couldn't be more sad. How could they allow others to eat their warhorses? Of course, they refused this group of hungry soldiers. So the conflict arose. The cavalrymen who were guarding the warhorses' corpses were beaten down. Then the soldiers started to argue again. Some complained that they were given less. Some complained that others were given more. It was noisy. In the end, the quartermaster came forward. He gathered the dead warhorses together and distributed them uniformly. No one had more and no one had less. Only then was the crisis temporarily averted. However, Long Ao had already seen the signs of destruction. Today we can eat dead horses. Tomorrow we can starve for half a meal. But the day after tomorrow we will have to kill live horses. How can a cavalry be called a cavalry without a horse? Wu Kuangyun appeared while Long Ao was in a terrible fix. General Wu was shouldering a heavy responsibility this time. Minister Chu had sent him to persuade Long Ao to surrender. Everyone could guess that Wu Kuangyun would persuade Long Ao to surrender given his temperament. Will he persuade Long Ao to surrender? This was simply impossible. Because Minister Chu didn't intend to accept Long Ao's surrender. Because Wu Kuangyun's first words angered Long Ao. "Long Ao, fuck your mother. I'm here to persuade you to surrender." Long Ao was so angry that he fainted. Originally, he had thought that he might as well agree for the time being if Wu Kuangyun came to persuade him to surrender. Then, he would go to the battlefield and attack Prime Minister Diwu in passing. This would be considered as atonement for his crime. However, the other party had sent Wu Kuangyun to persuade him to surrender. Is this persuasion? This is a declaration of war, okay? I would rather die than surrender. Long Ao spurred his horse out of the formation. He roared with anger. He waited until he got closer. Then he lowered his voice and said, "Wu Kuangyun, you fucking persuade me to surrender, but you don't know how to persuade me." His voice was very low. Only Wu Kuangyun could hear him. Long Ao's meaning was, You have come to persuade me to surrender. But you can't have this attitude. How can I agree with your attitude? You have to promise me a high position and generous salary. You have to show me your will. Then I will pretend to consider it. You will persuade me again and again. Then I will surrender. Moreover, you have to give me some face in front of my subordinates in front of the two armies. You can't just shout like a dog and I will surrender. How can there be such a thing? Wu Kuangyun didn't buy it. He tilted his ear and asked loudly, "What did you say? Speak louder." Long Ao almost died from anger. He gritted his teeth and said, "Wu Kuangyun, you have to show some will to persuade me to surrender, right?" Wu Kuangyun suddenly realized. He lowered his voice and said, "You mean one?" Long Ao was delighted. "It seems there's hope," he said in a low voice. "I mean, you put forward some conditions." "One." As if. Wu Kuangyun winked at him. Long Ao's voice became even lower. "As if, you will make me a great general. Then I will be promoted to an official position. Then how will my subordinates be arranged? How will they be rewarded? You have surrendered. And you still want to be a great general?" Wu Kuangyun shouted. His eyes were wide open in astonishment. His voice was very loud, so many people heard him. Long Ao was so anxious that his face started to sweat. "My dear father, can't you be a little bit quieter?" "Fuck!" Wu Kuangyun suddenly shouted. "Even if you are in a hurry to surrender, you won't call me father anymore, right?" Long Ao stared at him. "Why are you staring at me? Tell me, did you just call me father? Isn't that right?" Wu Kuangyun was full of vigor as he shouted loudly. "Wu Kuangyun!" Long Ao roared. His face turned red, and the corners of his eyes almost cracked. "What are you shouting for?" Wu Kuangyun's voice became louder. "What? You called me your father just now. You still dare to deny it? Long Ao, do you dare to swear to the heavens? Swear in the name of your ancestors that you didn't call me father? Swear. Swear. Swear that you didn't call me father. Send. Send." Long Ao trembled with anger. He glared at Wu Kuangyun. But he didn't dare to swear. Filial piety was very important in this era. Long Ao was already an old man. Although he didn't mean it that way, he didn't dare to swear on his ancestors. Fuck, you still want to be a great general. You still want to be promoted. You still want to be rewarded. Fuck. Wu Kuangyun's voice was like thunder. "I tell you, Long Ao, it's useless to call me father. Kneel down if you surrender. If you don't surrender, I will kill you." "What? You want to talk about conditions with us? You must be crazy." Chapter 388. Wu Kuangyun. "You!" Long Ao pointed his finger at Wu Kuangyun in grief and indignation as he cried out. However, he saw Wu Kuangyun's malicious mockery. He never intended to persuade me to surrender. He was playing with me. Long Ao almost collapsed when this thought arose in his mind. "I've always been proud of my intelligence. But I've been played so miserably." The enemy troops at the front and the army at the rear burst into loud boos at the same time. This made Long Ao want to draw his sword and cut his own throat to apologize to the world. Humiliation. Extraordinary humiliation. Long Ao had always been proud and arrogant. Moreover, he had never lost a battle. So when had he ever suffered such humiliation? Moreover, it was a heavy blow. His troops were already at the end of their rope. The only thing that could keep them afloat was the prestige that he had built up over the years as the main commander. But the prestige that I've painstakingly built up over the years has been destroyed by the enemy's persuasion. It's over. Long Ao was so angry that he almost couldn't sit still on the horse's back. His vision turned black, and his heart turned disheartened. He almost subconsciously turned his horse around and galloped back to his army. So, this is what the generals who have been defeated and humiliated by me in the past were thinking in their hearts. Long Ao suddenly had this thought at this time. Wu Kuangyun didn't chase after him. He just urged his horse to stand still. He looked at Long Ao with a mocking smile on his face. He thought, "It seems that the method taught by King of Hell Chu is really useful. Look at this guy. He's so angry that he's half dead. It's so cool. Long Ao galloped back to his army. He saw a lot of doubts and disdain in their eyes. The army was speechless as they looked at him. He had deliberately lowered his voice when he was speaking in front of the army. It was clear that he was pleading. But the enemy didn't lower his voice. The enemy said that Long Ao had called him father. And General Long didn't refute. The enemy forced him to swear. And he only spat out a mouthful of blood. He didn't swear. What does this mean? This means that General Long is begging for mercy. He's begging for good treatment after surrendering. He's even bowing and calling him father. But he's being ruthlessly humiliated. Is this really our Marshal Long? Long Ao felt as if his heart had been struck by a heavy blow as he looked at the silent, doubtful eyes of the crowd. He felt as if a knife had been twisted in his heart. He wanted to say something, but he saw stars in front of his eyes. He opened his mouth and spat out a big mouthful of blood. Suddenly, he felt disheartened, and a sense of death welled up in his heart. He turned his horse's head and suddenly shouted, "Wu Kuang Yun! When I was alive I couldn't eat your flesh, but when I die I will chase your soul. I Long Ao will never coexist with you in this world." As he roared, blood gushed out of his mouth. Suddenly, he stretched out his hand and pulled out his long sword. He then shouted angrily, "Wu Kuang Yun, wait for me. Tonight my ghost will come to find you." He brandished his long sword and unexpectedly killed himself on the horse's back. His voice was shrill, as if a malicious spirit from hell had suddenly rushed out, howling madly with endless hatred, causing everyone who heard it to feel their hair stand on end. He was dead, and his blood was gushing out, but his body didn't collapse. His eyes were still glaring angrily at Wu Kuang Yun. His eyes were as deep as a dead fish's, and seemed to be connected to the netherworld. This generation's famous general had finally chosen to commit suicide. "Marshal!" The bodyguard burst into tears. "Marshal!" Thousands of people shouted together. They knelt down and wept bitterly. Wu Kuang Yun on the opposite side shuddered. Then he suddenly burst into laughter. "Fuck! I have killed more than 10 million people in my life. You're not the only one who wants to settle accounts with me for revenge. Come to find me tonight? Then you'll have to line up first. Fuck, you're already dead, but you're still scaring people." Then he waved his arms and shouted, "Long Ao is dead. When are you going to surrender?" He wanted to say, "You and the others." But he felt that he couldn't say it out loud. So he had no choice but to say, "You and the others." On the city wall, a black robe was fluttering in the wind. Behind the black mask was a pair of cold and ruthless eyes. It was King of Hell Chu. "Minister Chu, do we summon these people to surrender or?" Tai Bu Tian's eyes flashed as he asked. "The general is dead. So, we naturally have to summon them to surrender." Chu Yang insipidly said, "Execute Long Ao's bodyguards after they surrender. Execute several generals who are leading the troops. Imprison the remaining generals. Then break up the troops and reorganize them. This is a new force. I can understand if the generals are killed or imprisoned, but why execute the bodyguards?" Tai Bu Tian frowned. "I'm afraid now is not the time to think about mercy. Instead, we should think about survival. Survival is the key to the world's hegemony." Chu Yang coldly said, "The reason why Your Majesty doesn't understand is that Your Majesty doesn't know what a bodyguard is. Bodyguard, these two words aren't in vain." Tai Bu Tian smiled embarrassedly. A general next to him said, "Your Majesty doesn't command the army. So, it's understandable that you don't understand. However, we can't kill many of these bodyguards with our own hands, because as Long Ao's bodyguards, most of them will follow him and commit suicide once he dies." His expression was a little heavy as he said, "Even if they don't die with him, they will still have the thought of taking revenge before they die." He let out a long sigh. "Your Majesty, this is what Minister Chu meant by bodyguards." He paused for a moment and said, "The so-called bodyguards are the real hardcore. In other words, they are the embodiment of the word loyalty. Often, there is an unstable rule on the battlefield. That is, the basic condition to measure a famous general is to see whether his bodyguards will die for him. How many people are willing to die for him?" Tai Bu Tian was stunned. Sure enough, after Long Ao died, some of his bodyguards wailed on the spot and cut themselves with their swords. The soldiers of Iron Cloud saw that the situation was hopeless after they started to surrender. So they put down their weapons one after another. The remaining bodyguards killed many of their comrades in anger. Then their comrades fought back and chopped them into meat paste. Iron Cloud's army didn't move. The ordinary soldiers of Great Zhao and the bodyguards of Iron Cloud were fighting a bloody battle. Each of the bodyguards had tears on their faces. They crazily chopped and killed while crazily shouting, "The great commander isn't that kind of person. The great commander isn't that kind of person. You have blasphemed the great commander. You." Such tragic cries didn't disappear until the 3,000 bodyguards were completely buried. In fact, when there was only one person left, that person was still shouting with all his might when he made the last slash, "Isn't the marshal?" This voice was very loud. It seemed to be shouting for the great commander's eternal rest. It was to clear the great commander's name, and to protect the great commander's reputation. It all originated from the unconditional trust of the great commander when he was alive. When everyone misunderstood, the bodyguards sacrificed their lives to offer a final song of praise to the man they were loyal to. The great commander was worthy of our sacrifice. But his voice froze right there. His body was also submerged in the flashes of the swords. Their blood and vigor soared to the sky, just like their loyalty. Tai Butian looked at the bloody scene and sighed deeply. What a pity. Such a famous general died so sullenly. It's a pity. Chu Yang said indifferently, Your Majesty is overflowing with camaraderie. It's undesirable. His words weren't polite at all, but Tai Butian wasn't angry at all. She asked why. The so-called famous generals have survived hundreds of battles. Naturally, every general has his own loyal followers. When a general dies, many people will be buried with him. And these people are all willing to do it. This is the charm of the general himself. He said indifferently, if he doesn't deserve to be a general. On the battlefield, this kind of thing is too common. Some generals will even deliberately gather some homeless people, orphans, and prisoners on death row as their own subordinates. Because they know that these people have nothing. Even if it's just a smile, they will die for them. What's more, the grace of a new life. Besides, this is a war between two countries and not a civil war within the country, right? Tai Butian asked with a smile. That's right. I understand. The alliance won't pay dividends and won't let the tiger return to the mountain. But as long as I see such a scene, I can't help but feel touched. Tai Butian laughed and said, Because there are so many heroes in the world, but I can't use all of them. Chu Yang was silent for a while. Then he said, When all the heroes in the world are used by the ruler can only turn them into mediocre people. When the birds are gone, the bow is hidden. When the cunning rabbit is dead, the hound is cooked. Although it's cruel, it's also inevitable after unification. Tai Butian was silent. After a long time, she sighed deeply and said, That's right. These words were obviously derogatory. But Tai Butian and Chu Yang both knew that this was the way to rule a country. When the birds are gone, the bow is no longer hidden. Who is to be shot at? When the cunning rabbit is gone, if the hound is not cooked, it will only bring disaster to the world. At the very least, it will be an unstable factor. Generals all knew that war was for peace. But when there was true peace, it was when the general retired. The greatest value of a soldier could only be reflected in the cruelty of war. That was all. War needed to raise morale, but peace needed stability and harmony. This was an irreconcilable contradiction to begin with. Tai Butian turned her head and looked at Chu Yang. She said deeply, Minister Chu, I didn't expect you to have such a thorough understanding of the way to rule a country. Since ancient times, people have used the phrase, the bow is hidden after the birds are gone, to scold those in power. But hearing it from you today, I realize that although this phrase is unpleasant to hear, it's actually a true way to rule a country. As long as the bow isn't destroyed after the birds are gone, it's already the magnanimity of an emperor, Chu Yang said quietly. Tai Butian took a deep breath and said firmly, Absolutely not. This sentence was akin to an oath of allegiance. The conversation between the two was a little solemn. After this sentence, both of them didn't speak anymore. After a long time, Chu Yang raised his eyebrows and said, We can open the city gates to accept the surrender. Tai Butian heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. The battle here has finally come to an end. His face was smiling, but he was thinking in his heart, we're about to go to the main battlefield. And Yao Qianqian is there. I don't know. Regarding the bow being hidden after the birds are gone, this is just my personal understanding. I suddenly felt emotional. Everyone can just take a look. Chapter 389. After Minister Chu took control of the army, he played a small trick. The enemy's 400,000 soldiers took off their armor and surrendered. He ended the battle without shedding a drop of blood. The enemy had reached a dead end. So Minister Chu had resorted to trickery. But one couldn't deny that Minister Chu's strategy had no problems. He had acted swiftly and decisively the moment he had assumed office. He had continuously harassed the enemy dozens of times in one night. This had made the enemy panic. It was like removing salt from a wound. He had asked Wu Kuangyun to go out and persuade the enemy to surrender. Wu Kuangyun had a special status. So, he had personally come to persuade the enemy to surrender. Long Ao would have been despised if he hadn't come out. Moreover, he had sent Wu Kuangyun to persuade the enemy to surrender. This had given Long Ao a vague hint. We can talk. That's because the status of both sides was high enough. Long Ao had reached the end of his rope. Wu Kuangyun's arrival had given him an opportunity to regain his face. So he had no choice but to go out. Moreover, Long Ao had to go out under such circumstances. This chapter is provided by Baidu Tieba of the world-defying stage Heavens. Wu Kuangyun would have driven Long Ao crazy if he hadn't angered him to death in accordance with King of Hell Chu's teachings. Of course, Long Ao would have lost his prestige in the army at the very least. There would have been a commotion at most under normal circumstances. But he would have lost his prestige in this life and death situation. And that would have been the end of him. So Long Ao had committed suicide. The 400,000 soldiers had lost their leader. They had lost confidence in Long Ao. In fact, they even despised him. Moreover, they were in a desperate situation. So what else could they do but surrender? Even after this incident, they still refused to accept King of Hell Chu's decision. They thought, I could have done it at such a time. However, this thought disappeared without a trace after they had taken over the army. And they had seen that Long Ao had secretly ordered people to open up a big slope. This slope would have been completed in half a day at most. If the general's thoughts before Chu Yang's arrival had been to wait for the enemy to starve to death and take advantage of the situation, then these 400,000 soldiers would have flown away right under their noses. That would be like a cooked duck flying away. If things really turned out like that, the generals would probably even have the heart to kill themselves. The generals were drenched in cold sweat when they were talking about how to deal with these captives. Especially the surrendered generals who had entered the commander's tent. They were so scared that they almost pissed their pants. Because Minister Chu had said, kill them all. Minister Chu was wearing a black robe and a black veil as he spoke. His eyes were cold and cruel, without the slightest bit of emotion. Everyone was horrified. As the ruler of a country, Tai Butian repeatedly pleaded for leniency, believing that this move was against the harmony of the heavens. However, King of Hell Chu said, what's wrong with that? Wasn't it just 400,000 people? Since I can smash 100,000 people to death, why would I care about a blood debt of 400,000? Hearing this, all the generals felt their bodies cramp. So, that extremely terrifying landslide that day was also caused by this King of Hell Chu. Oh my God, is he still human? None of the generals dared to say anything. Minister Chu was determined to kill. He even said, let them dig a big hole by themselves, then drive them all in and bury themselves alive. Tai Butian repeatedly pleaded for leniency. Therefore, King of Hell Chu seemed to have no choice but to relent under the sincere pleas of the ruler of a country. Obviously he was very unhappy. Threatening, he said, today is for His Majesty. Otherwise I will kill you all. But, if any of these captives isn't obedient, I will kill the whole team. If any of them isn't obedient, I will bury all 400,000 of them alive. The surrendered generals walked out of the big tent after the terrifying meeting was over. Their legs were weak. Their faces were pale, and they were wiping their sweat. They were scared witless as they returned to their troops. Then they ordered, "No one is allowed to act blindly without thinking. Motherfucker, anyone who moves will be whipped." They also explained, His Majesty, the Emperor of Iron Cloud, had repeatedly argued with reason. So, he had saved our lives from King of Hell Chu's butcher's knife. One could well imagine what the response would be like. Chu Yang and Tai Butian played the role of good cop and bad cop. They pacified the captives and handed them over to Wu Yi. Then, they left behind 150,000 soldiers to guard the heaven-splitting mountain pass, and led 300,000 soldiers to return in triumph to the main battlefield. Whether it was the defending generals or the surrendered generals, everyone heaved a sigh of relief when King of Hell Chu left. They didn't know what was going on. Perhaps it was a psychological effect, but they felt as if a thick layer of low clouds had shrouded the heaven-splitting mountain pass as soon as they saw King of Hell Chu's black robe. Tai Butian was grinning from ear to ear on the way. Minister Chu, you played the role of bad cop very well. Lian was also doubtful. Didn't you say that you wanted to surrender? So, why did you suddenly want to massacre them? Fortunately, Lian's brain worked quickly. Chu Yang tilted his head and looked at Tai Butian with a strange look in his eyes. Your Majesty thinks that I'm joking? Tai Butian's complexion changed. She said while stammering, "Don't tell me you're not." Chu Yang smiled and said in a cold voice, "These are merely 400,000 people. There's no harm in killing them. You must know that these captives may become the biggest variable if Diwu Qingro doesn't get defeated. After all, this is the heaven-splitting mountain pass. It's better to kill them cleanly, once and for all. You don't need to worry about anything." Tai Butian was dumbstruck. She realized that she had broken out in cold sweat after a long while. 400,000 people. You want to kill them? And you want to kill them? Of course, you're going to be the lord of this world in the future. So, killing them all won't have a good influence on you. So you pleaded for mercy, and I pushed the boat along with the current to give you face, Chu Yang said calmly. Black lines appeared on Tai Butian's forehead. Lian's face is really big. Tai Longcheng hadn't slept for 3 days and 3 nights by the time Chu Yang and Tai Butian arrived at the main battlefield barracks. Tai Longcheng was burning with anxiety because of the constant reports of the heaven-splitting mountain pass movements. Tai Longcheng flew into a rage when he heard that Wu Kuangyuan had left His Majesty behind and had run back to the heaven-splitting mountain pass to fight the enemy. He wanted to go there himself. He wanted to chop off Wu Kuangyuan's dog head even if the entire front was routed. Tai Longcheng was so angry that he vomited blood. He hadn't been able to eat or sleep well these past few days. Each day felt like a year. Tai Longcheng almost fainted from excitement when he saw Tai Butian return. He rushed over to greet her. His old eyes were almost brimming with tears. Tai Butian sensitively discovered that Chu Yang, who was beside her, had already disappeared without a trace. Niao Qianqian knew that he had gone to replace Wu Kuangyuan. She felt an indescribable sense of loss in her heart. Chu Yang rushed into Butian Pavilion's tent. Based on Wu Qianqian's habits, Chu Yang did not hesitate to find her tent. His speed was extremely fast. It was as if a light breeze had blown by, and he was already gone. He was about to open the door when he suddenly heard a sigh from inside. Chu Yang was startled. He couldn't help but stop his footsteps. His Majesty has returned. Has he returned? Niao Qianqian sat on the chair in a daze. Her heart was in a mess. Niao Qianqian wanted to be the first to run out when she heard that the army had returned. However, she stopped when she reached the door. What if he hasn't returned? What if His Majesty has brought back bad news? What should I do? This chapter is provided by the world-defying stage Heavens by Du Tieba. She was worried about personal gains and losses. She didn't dare to move even a step. The truth was right in front of her. She would see it as long as she went out. However, she didn't dare to take this step no matter what. She was afraid that she would cry when she saw Chu Yang return. She was also afraid that Chu Yang hadn't returned and was dead. She was afraid and hopeful. Her heart was in a mess. She couldn't make up her mind. Suddenly, her eyes darkened. A voice said, "Minister Chu, what national affairs are you thinking about?" Wu Qianqian's body trembled. She didn't dare to turn around. She closed her eyes and opened them again. A slender jade-like hand was about to pinch her arm. Am I dreaming? Am I dreaming? Then she viciously pinched him. It doesn't hurt. Wu Qianqian didn't believe it. She pinched again. It still doesn't hurt. She opened her eyes in disappointment. She said dejectedly, it's really a dream, Sai. A voice that seemed to be grimacing in pain said, Sister, of course it doesn't hurt. You pinched my arm. My poor arm is already purple. Wu Qianqian screamed and jumped up. Her chair flipped over with a bang. She turned around in surprise. However, she saw a distorted face. Chu Yang sucked in cold air and said, Sister, please, let go of your hand. Wu Qianqian looked down. She saw that her slender jade-like fingers were pinching Chu Yang's arm. She had jumped up and turned around. However, she didn't let go. Moreover, she had unconsciously used too much strength in her surprise. She knew that his flesh had been twisted by 310 degrees. She quickly let go. She didn't know what to do for a moment. Should I throw myself at him and hug him? Or should I pretend that nothing happened? However, Miao Qianqian's eyes were already red. Tears streamed down her face. She felt her heart beating wildly. She was so excited that she felt that it was worth it, even if she died at this moment. Because he came back safe and sound. He came back. I'm back. Chu Yang smiled and said, You were worried, right? Miao Qianqian smiled sadly. She quickly wiped her tears and turned around. She said, It's good that you're back. Haha, you've made people worried these days. Miao Qianqian's voice had been very emotional when she had started to speak. She was trembling. However, she had calmed down by the time she had finished speaking. She turned around and looked at Chu Yang. She smiled and said, You're back. I can finally relax. It's been such a long time. I'm really tired. Chu Yang saw that Wu Qianqian was trying her best to control her emotions. He suddenly felt a lump in his throat. It seemed that some kind of emotion was blocking his heart. He couldn't breathe. He forced himself to control himself and said, Yes, it's been hard on you. Wu Qianqian smiled faintly and said, You sit down. I'll go get you a cup of water. She turned around and left. The two of them had been separated for a long time. However, they were trying their best to talk about irrelevant things. They were trying their best to control themselves. They were afraid that they would overstep their boundaries. Wu Qianqian turned around and walked out of the tent. But her small mouth suddenly flattened. Then she covered her mouth with all her might. Her tears started to flow out violently. But she controlled them with all her might. She didn't make any sound. She walked faster and faster until she finally reached a corner. Then she squatted down and started to cry silently. Chapter 390. By the time Wu Qianqian returned, she had already regained her usual appearance. Her eyes were a little red, but her whole person looked bright and beautiful. Her style was peerless. It seemed as if a long-lost vitality had returned to her body at this moment. She did not say anything, nor did she do anything. When Chu Yang was not around, she took over his role. She was king of Hell Chu. She was the black robe that intimidated the entire Iron Cloud. She was flawless. She killed decisively for him. She commanded heroes for him. She crossed thousands of miles for him. She used thunderous methods for him. She was resourceful for him. She was sinister and vicious for him. She bore everything for him. No one knew what kind of effort she had to put in to do all this. To be able to imitate a man to such an extent as a woman, she had to have a deep understanding of this person. She had to have an unforgettable impression of this person. However, when Chu Yang returned, she suddenly became the same Wu Qianqian who quietly accompanied Chu Yang, quietly watched him, and quietly assisted him when he was around. She was such a woman. She would never force herself to ask for anything, nor would she get anything. She would only silently wait and silently contribute herself. She was very smart. She could clearly see Chu Yang's daily behavior. Therefore, she understood. Therefore, she did not force herself. Therefore, she would only silently endure and silently love herself. I love you. This is my business. It has nothing to do with you. I never said that you have to accept me because I love you. I don't even want you to realize my feelings. I don't want you to feel embarrassed. If you want to leave, you can leave. But I am here. If you want to go back, you can go back. I am here. But as long as you don't take the initiative to confess to me, I will never take the initiative to say these words to you. Chu Yang, I like you. I won't. I am not afraid of your rejection. But I am afraid of waking up from my dream. Because in my dream you are mine. After a long silence, Wu Qianqian began to speak. Her voice was very dull. Chu Yang, that second martial uncle Li Jinsong, I have already taken care of him. Huh? Chu Yang was startled. Not only him. There are many people from beyond the heavens sect. I have already taken care of all of them. Niao Qianqian said calmly. This group of people will cause too much trouble in the future. Who knows when they will cause trouble? Once something happens, it will be a big problem. So I might as well clean them all up. Chu Yang's mouth became two big mouths. How did you clean it up? Chu Yang closed his mouth after a long while. He only felt that his chin had almost fallen off. He kept gagging. This girl was really good at pranks. To think that he would even deal with his martial uncles one by one. Wasn't he afraid that his father would make things difficult for him? I wanted to wait for you to come back and clean it up, but I thought that since you have been expelled from the sect, it would be inconvenient. Niao Qianqian said lightly, so I thought that I might as well do it for you. Chu Yang gave him a thumbs up. You're so thoughtful. Li Jinsong was poisoned because of his woman. It is called the spring and autumn heartbreak powder. In other words, it will flare up once a year. If there is no medicine to suppress it, the victim will suffer for 3 days and 3 nights before dying. All of his internal organs will rot. Second martial uncle had always been dissatisfied with father's decision to take charge of Beyond the Heavens sect. So, the Golden Horse Riders department came looking for him at that time. They said that they could provide him with medicine, and that they could help him take charge of Beyond the Heavens sect. So, he was easily manipulated. Wu Qianqian continued, moreover. He loves his woman very much. But Golden Horse Riders department only provided him with medicine to temporarily suppress the poison. As for the crystal spirit mushroom, they didn't give him anything. They just left him hanging. I see. Chu Yang nodded. Well, when he was eavesdropping, Li Jinsong had asked those people for the crystal spirit mushroom, but it was to no avail. Then, he remembered that he had once entered the treasury of Golden Horse Riders department. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It wasn't that Golden Horse Riders department didn't want to give it to him, but that thing, Golden Horse Riders department didn't have it. How did you deal with it? Chu Yang asked. Killed him. Niao Qianqian's face was a little sad, I don't know why, but he had a premonition. He chose to assassinate Tai Longcheng at night. In the end, he was besieged by people from Butian Pavilion and died on the spot. Before he died, he begged father to let go of his wife and son. But after that woman knew about this, she committed suicide. Niao Qianqian sighed and said, before she died, she said, I don't care if he is a good man or a bad man. As long as he is alive, I will accompany him. As long as he is dead, I will go find him. After so many years, I've really caused him enough suffering. Now that I've reached the netherworld, I can finally stop causing him trouble and repay him properly. If this matter was told by someone else, it might have been an undying love. But when it came from Wu Qianqian's mouth, it was as plain as water. But it still contained a heavy charm. Chu Yang listened and sighed. Li Jianyin was expelled. His legs were broken. I am afraid. Niao Qianqian continued, as for the others, those who should be killed were killed, and those who should be crippled were crippled. They have all been cleaned up. Chu Yang was speechless. Niao Qianqian spoke plainly, but when she did this, she had to endure a lot of psychological pressure. Chu Yang could imagine it even if he only thought about it. I have an idea. Wu Qianqian looked at him and whispered, wait until the war is over. If Iron Cloud is defeated, everything will be taken care of. If Iron Cloud wins, let father and the others go back to Beyond the Heavens sect and rebuild Beyond the Heavens sect. They don't want Iron Cloud to be consecrated as a national sect. They don't want to hold any positions in the imperial court. Good. Chu Yang was full of admiration. This move of retreating in the face of adversity without any reward was really the best move. I have done everything for you, but I don't want anything. But you are the Emperor of Iron Cloud, the ruler of the world. You can't shortchange us, right? Moreover, I am now the same as you. I am no longer a disciple of Beyond the Heavens sect. Niao Qianqian lowered her eyes. Her expression could not be seen clearly. Why? Chu Yang was startled. Because you will leave sooner or later. So I will be the king of Hell Chu for a long time. Niao Qianqian smiled gently and added, the king of Hell Chu of this generation. Her laughter was cold and indifferent. It was as calm as stagnant water. She said, you Chu Yang are only a passerby. So you are not the king of Hell Chu. You are the king of Hell Chu for a lifetime. The king of Hell Chu of this generation? The king of Hell Chu? The king of Hell Chu? Such an outstanding beauty with peerless talent would hide behind a black robe for a lifetime? Her youthful elegance and charm would be covered up for a lifetime. Chu Yang's heart suddenly felt as if it was being overturned. He looked at her in a daze. He only felt that his heart was in a mess. Wu Qianqian gently turned her head. Her eyes were like limpid autumn waters. They swept across Chu Yang's face. Chu Yang clearly felt a bone-piercing pain. Then he heard her say, using your identity as the king of Hell Chu to make Beyond the Heavens sect immortal. Wasn't this your ultimate plan when you supported me in the beginning? Chu Yang felt a pain in his heart. He felt as if the pain had swept over him. His mind went blank in an instant. Iron Cloud readied its troops and horses, and prepared for war. Tai Butian had returned with 300,000 troops. Moreover, the number of troops in the country had increased over this period of time. So the total number of troops had already exceeded 3 million. Great Zhao had nearly 1 million troops. But they had lost more than 1 million at the heaven-splitting mountain pass. So they only had 4 million troops left. Both sides were almost evenly matched. Tai Longcheng's heart had been in suspense for a long time. But he finally felt relieved. Tai Butian and Chu Yang had arrived at Iron Cloud's military camp that night. Suddenly, the Great Zhao's camp burst into thunderous cheers. It was like a tsunami. It didn't disperse for a long time. It was as lively as the New Year's celebration. Then a big flag was hoisted high from Great Zhao's military camp. A golden dragon was treading on the white clouds. The two words Diwu were swaying in the wind. The whistling summer wind made a rustling sound. Its imposing aura was vigorous, as if it wanted to dominate the world. Diwu Qingro had arrived. It wasn't clear whether it was a coincidence or deliberate. In short, Tai Longcheng, Tai Butian, and Diwu Qingro had been fighting for several years. And King of Hell Chu and Diwu Qingro brazenly faced each other at this moment. This battle would decide the fate of the world. Diwu Qingro's complacent expression was swept away. His face was as calm as water. He stepped into the commander's tent. His heart was burning with anger. He had received the news that Jin Nangkai and the others had been annihilated the day before. This news was like a bolt from the blue. It had thrown Diwu Qingro, who had always been calm and composed, into a mess. He had anticipated that it would be impossible for those 3 armies to be annihilated. However, he couldn't help but sigh when he heard the report. He didn't say anything. The mountains suddenly collapsed and the ground cracked. The slanting valley was filled up. Hundreds of thousands of people were buried alive. More than 1 million soldiers were divided into 2 sections. The outside couldn't enter and the inside couldn't come out. This is the will of heaven. Diwu Qingro's heart was somewhat heavy. Great Zhao's army was much more than iron clouds on the surface. But he knew that there was a clear difference in the fighting strength of both sides. Iron Cloud was located in the north, so its people were valiant. Except for a few people, almost everyone could fight on horseback. And they could dismount and fight on foot. As long as there were enough war horses, there would be as many cavalry soldiers as there were war horses. On the other hand, Great Zhao's army couldn't do that. It was located in the south. The climate was mild. And the people there were soft and tender. They weren't on the same level as the fierce and rough soldiers of Iron Cloud. Therefore, Diwu Qingro could only use his wisdom to make up for it. However, Diwu Qingro also had a great consolation. King of Hell Chu is dead. Otherwise, it would have been very troublesome for me to face the Iron Cloud Triangle alone. Jing Menghun had rushed to Diwu Qingrou's side with bruises all over his body. Diwu Qingrou couldn't believe his eyes. He was a peak king-level expert. He had dispatched millions of people to kill a revered-level expert like King of Hell Chu. And Jing Menghun had crippled him. Moreover, his body was covered with cuts and bruises. He had almost lost his life. This was beyond everyone's expectations. However, Diwu Qingrou had heard that hundreds of people had attacked King of Hell Chu at the end of the battle, and Jing Menghun had successfully launched a sneak attack. He felt that King of Hell Chu was dead, and Jing Menghun was very confident. Even an emperor-level expert wouldn't have been able to withstand that kind of attack. Diwu Qingrou sighed the next day. It's a pity that King of Hell Chu wasn't able to fight a decisive battle with such a hero on the battlefield. It's a real regret of my life. Suddenly, a soldier came to report, Prime Minister, a man from Iron Cloud has come out. He's wearing black clothes, a black robe and a black veil. He claims to be an old friend of the Prime Minister's mansion. He says that he wants to thank the Prime Minister for his generosity in gifting the orchid incense to you. So, he wants to talk with the Prime Minister. Chapter 391. Then, he looked at Jing Menghun with a gentle gaze. Jing Menghun's complexion turned deathly pale. He cried out, "This is impossible." Diwu Qingrou insipidly said, "He's here." "What's impossible?" Jing Menghun was in a daze. Diwu Qingrou had already stood up. A group of Iron Cloud soldiers were standing in neat rows on the battlefield. They were standing in a quiet manner. The east wind was blazing. Iron Cloud's military flag was pointed straight to the sky. Then it was blown up neatly with a flapping sound. The fluttering sound of the military flag could make anyone who heard it feel a desire to kill. It was a desire for war. 2 fast horses were standing motionless in front of the troops. 2 men were standing upright on the backs of the horses. Couldn't be seen how old they were. They were standing in front of a magnificent army. But they still looked somewhat blurry under the blazing sun. They couldn't be seen clearly. In front of them a black horse stood alone. There was a man on the horse. He was dressed in black and wore a black robe. He wore a ferocious golden mask. His loose black robe made a sharp sound as it fluttered in the wind of the east wind. Around the black-clothed man, a biting cold aura was constantly surging and churning. He was alone on his horse. But the soldiers of the Great Zhao army on the other side had a clear feeling in their hearts. It was as if an ancient devil god had suddenly drilled out from the depths of hell. He had appeared in broad daylight. Wherever his sharp gaze landed, everyone felt a bone-chilling coldness. King of Hell Chu. He didn't need to announce his name. But the soldiers of Great Zhao couldn't help but think of this name as soon as they saw him. Only this kind of imposing manner, could be on par with Prime Minister Diwu. Only such a person could withstand the all-out pursuit of the Golden Horse Riders Department. And he had violently galloped for a distance of 13,000 miles. And he had appeared here at this moment. The bugle horn of Great Zhao's army resounded in a desolate manner. The entire army suddenly parted like a tide. It left a quiet and dry road between them. Everyone's eyes became full of respect and fanaticism at this moment. The sound of hoofbeats slowly resounded. Diwu Qingrou's guards appeared. Diwu Qingrou appeared in front of King of Hell Chu with a faint smile on his face. The guard was somewhat hesitant, but Diwu Qingrou pointed his folding fan forward. His attitude was very firm. The guards had no choice but to continue to carry him forward. They only stopped when they crossed the line. Then Diwu Qingrou waved his hand, and all the soldiers retreated. Only Diwu Qingrou's carefree chair was left on the battlefield, and he was facing a 1,000-man army all by himself. Then Diwu Qingrou slightly raised his head. He looked at Chu Yang and smiled. His smile was light, but it contained many kinds of gratitude. The 2 shadows were somewhat restless. Diwu Qingrou is rumored to not know any martial arts. This is a heaven-sent opportunity. What if he were to kill or capture him now? The 2 moved slightly and Chu Yang was startled. He shouted in a low voice, "Do you want to die?" Ing was stunned. Diwu Qingrou is an emperor-level expert. Chu Yang said in a low voice. The two shadows broke out in a cold sweat, and their eyes became dull. Emperor-level expert? Diwu Qingro had deceived the world? Then Chu Yang urged his warhorse. The warhorse resolutely walked towards Diwu Qingro step by step. The distance was getting closer and closer. Line. The distance between the two was less than 30 feet. This was a very dangerous distance. Especially for Chu Yang, it was even more dangerous. Then Chu Yang stopped the warhorse and raised his eyes to look at Diwu Qingro. Diwu Qingro also raised his head at this time. He looked at Chu Yang with a warm gaze. Their eyes met. It was unknown why, but all the soldiers behind them who knew that these two men were meeting today felt a strange feeling rise in their hearts the moment their eyes met. It seemed as if the whole world had suddenly shaken at this moment. Then it suddenly became dark. Then Diwu Qingro laughed in a relaxed manner. He sat on the carefree chair. His whole body was extremely relaxed. He said, "It's not easy to meet you." Chu Yang replied with equal harshness, "Prime Minister Diwu also doesn't go out of the house." Diwu Qingro laughed happily and said, "I need qualifications internally. I also need qualifications externally." Chu Yang also laughed. His meeting with Diwu Qingro today was also a stroke of genius. Originally, he thought that he would hide in the dark and use his own energy to cause destruction. Then, he would wait for the right opportunity to strike. However, Chu Yang thought for a long time. Then, he gave up and decided to meet directly. The news that King of Hell Chu was still alive would not be hidden from Diwu Qingro sooner or later. However, if he knew from other people's mouths, his heart would have a buffer. He would be mentally prepared. Diwu Qingro would quickly adjust himself. He would not be swayed by this news. Moreover, he would quickly formulate countermeasures. When he met Chu Yang again, he would have a sense of accomplishment. He would have a sense of satisfaction that everything was under his control. However, Chu Yang had suddenly jumped out and asked to see Diwu Qingro when Diwu Qingro was fully confident that the acting king was dead. This was a heavy blow to Diwu Qingro's complacency. This would make Diwu Qingro feel frustrated. So he didn't die. I paid such a big price and he didn't die. What Chu Yang needed was for Diwu Qingro to feel frustrated. Even if it was only a trace, it would make him feel that everything had deviated from his control. This was because the deciding factor of this war was not the number of troops. It was Diwu Qingro. If Diwu Qingro continued to take every possibility into account, then Iron Cloud's side would have gone all out. It would have been a long and arduous war. And they would have been defeated in the end. Therefore, Chu Yang had to do everything he could to break Diwu Qingro's mental state. And this sudden meeting was his first move. Diwu Qingro looked at his ferocious mask with some interest. He laughed and said, "You should have let those two come." Chu Yang smiled mischievously. "Come? I would have given you a chance to make a move. Would I have given you enough reason to kill the three of us in front of everyone?" "No." Diwu Qingro smiled. "They would have died if they had come. But you, I am not sure." He gently exhaled and said casually, "The mysterious King of Hell Chu. The King of Hell Chu who slaughtered the entire 13,000-mile border of Great Zhao." Haha, Chu Yang laughed. "It is my honor to receive such an evaluation from the Prime Minister." Diwu Qingro was silent for a while. Then he said, "In Great Zhao those two Chus were you?" "Yes." Chu Yang did not hide anything. There was no point in denying it at this moment. "Well, you were the one who received my palm, right?" Diwu Qingro asked, but his tone was firm. "Yes." "Well." Diwu Qingro's tone became calmer. He said, "You were the one who entered my hidden treasure house, right?" "Hidden treasure house?" Chu Yang frowned. "Not you." Diwu Qingro asked softly. "No." Chu Yang said. That was a mysterious ability that involved Jiesun. How could Chu Yang admit it? "Oh, so it wasn't you," Diwu Qingro said quietly. He carefully observed Chu Yang's facial expression from the corner of his eye. It was so sharp that it seemed as if it could penetrate his mask and see every inch of his face. After a long time, Diwu Qingro slowly said, "It seems that it was someone else." Unconsciously, he let out a sigh of relief. King of Hell Chu is not the master of Jiesun. "Prime Minister, you must take good care of the hidden treasure house," Chu Yang reminded him. It would be a huge loss if 1 or 2 items were taken away from such an important place. Are you taking pleasure in other people's misfortune? Diwu Qingro laughed involuntarily. Then, his eyes slowly became sharp as he said, "You didn't come to see me today to talk nonsense." Chuyang nodded seriously. "Actually, today I really just want to see what kind of person Prime Minister Diwu is. He is the ruler of the entire Great Zhao, and has the entire world in his hands." Diwu Qingro smiled slowly. "It is also a pleasure to watch the war." He calmly looked at Chuyang. "The moment you appeared and asked to see me, I knew that the war between the 2 countries had begun. Prime Minister Diwu, you must go all out in this war of the world." Chu Yang's eyes gradually became sharp. He softly said, "You have a great reputation. Don't ruin it." "I will go all out." Diwu Qingro slowly nodded. He didn't respond to Chu Yang's aggressiveness. Instead, he simply and calmly stated a fact. "Let's see who can decide the fate of this battlefield. Let's see who can rise and fall." "King of Helchu, huh?" Diwu Qingro softly said. "Don't let me down. I'm afraid that the Prime Minister will exceed your expectations," Chu Yang said indifferently. Suddenly he fiercely looked at Diwu Qingro. His eyes were as sharp as swords. It seemed as if 2 fierce divine swords were piercing through the blue dome of heaven. Diwu Qingro was still calm, but his pupils slightly shrank as he said, "Even if it is beyond my expectations, I must face it. I must win." Both of them no longer spoke. The sun was shining in the sky. There were no clouds for thousands of miles. However, everyone in the army behind the 2 of them could feel that a storm was coming. It seemed as if the entire blue sky was about to collapse at this moment. After a long time, Chu Yang looked up at the sky and insipidly said, "Prime Minister, if you lose this war, your name Diwu Qingro will be immortalized on this continent. The world will remember the name, Diwu Qingro. It will become a legend." Diwu Qingro calmly said, "After the destruction of Iron Cloud, I promise to write a biography of you. I will make the name of King of Hell Chu a legend of the continent." Both of them laughed together. Chapter 392. Chu Yang's laughter reverberated throughout the world. It seemed as if it could shake the wind and thunder. King of Hell Chu's arrogant attitude was imprinted in the hearts of the 2 armies. The heavens trembled, the mountains shook, and the earth moved. The 3 armies held their breaths. It seemed as if this figure who was roaring towards the sky was like a heaven-shaking god. It seemed as if he could cut the sky and the earth into 2 halves wherever he passed. So arrogant! So arrogant! This King of Hell Chu is good. Diwu Qingro chuckled and shook his head. "I was tricked by this guy in the end. He can proudly declare to the world that he can be as arrogant as he can. But I can't. But this has created an illusion in front of the 2 armies, that I have fallen into a disadvantageous position. This guy, he won't let go of any opportunity." Diwu Qingro slowly thought as he returned to his camp. He couldn't help but smile bitterly and shake his head while thinking about Chu Yang's words. This King of Hell Chu's words seemed meaningless on the surface. But in reality, every word he said was aimed at the defenses in his heart. Perhaps I would have been influenced by him if my mind wasn't firm. Immortality. Doesn't it affect me? Diwu Qingro's face sank. Millions of soldiers remained silent as they watched the 2 separate. They watched King of Hell Chu ride his horse back to the camp. They watched Diwu Qingro return. And the day passed like this. The curtain of night fell, and the world became dark. The Iron Cloud's camp was dotted with stars. The patrolling troops were coming and going. The army was ready for battle. Tai Longchong and Tai Butian were sitting opposite each other in the commander's tent. This King of Hell Chu is much more arrogant and overbearing than before. Tai Longchong smacked his lips and praised. He threatened Diwu Qingro. He made Diwu Qingro eat a loss in front of so many people. This is an unparalleled boost to the army's morale. Tai Butian smiled and replied, "Yes." He thought, "That's natural. After all, King of Hell Chu is the real King of Hell Chu." However, Diwu Qingro ate a loss in silence. So Great Zhao's morale will inevitably be affected. If Diwu Qingro wants to restore his reputation, then he can only use his face to do so. Therefore, Great Zhao may attack the camp tonight. Tai Longcheng and Diwu Qingro had fought for half of their lives. So, it could be said that they understood each other very well. It's just that, even if it's a sneak attack, it's hard to predict what kind of measures he'll take and what kind of methods he'll use. Tai Butian frowned. The only thing we can do now is to stick to the status quo. Tai Longcheng took a deep breath. In Butian Pavilion's main camp, King of Hell Chu was wearing a black robe and a sinister mask. He looked like the real King of Hell as he sat majestically on the highest chair. His sharp gaze was incomparably sharp as he looked at his subordinates. A bone-chilling cold filled the tent. Chang'an and Chan Miantong both sat straight and expressionless. Their hearts were filled with apprehension. What's going on? The minister had clearly relaxed for a while. Why is his coercion getting heavier and heavier this time? This feeling of oppression was really unbearable, making it hard for him to sit still. She stole a glance at Wu Qianqian, who was standing next to Chu Yang with an ice-cold expression. She cursed silently. When did this Russian granny come? How come we didn't see her? Especially during this period of time, the new recruits of Butian Pavilion were seeing the real King of Hell Chu for the first time. They were so frightened by this gloomy atmosphere that they almost peed in their pants. Two hall leaders, please report everything that has happened recently. Chu Yang's finger gently tapped on the table in front of him. It was as if the King of Hell was beating a drum. Both of them cursed silently in their hearts. Didn't you already know? But in this kind of situation, who would dare to say even half a word? They had no choice but to report everything again. Chu Yang quietly listened. Finally, he finished listening and said casually, so, you're saying that everyone has been very busy during this period of time, right? So everyone's strength hasn't improved. It's not because everyone didn't work hard, but because they were too busy? Isn't that the case? Chang'an and Chan Yutong's faces fell at the same time. This was the only thing that Minister Chu had not urged during this period of time. Everyone felt as if they had been pardoned. They did not expect that he would bring it up today. This is the place where we are right now. Tens of millions of ghosts are screaming day and night. Chu Yang said casually, now in my opinion, as long as the war starts, many of you will join the ranks of these ghosts. This is the consequence of not working hard on your own strength. Minister Chu snorted heavily. Everyone kept quiet out of fear. We will soon face Golden Horse Riders Department. Everyone get ready. Chu Yang said casually. Then he waved his hand. Chang'an and the others hurriedly left. They were sweating profusely. The minister's power was getting heavier and heavier. Only Wu Qianqian and Chu Yang were left in the tent. The strength of these people must be pushed every day. Chu Yang said softly, people are lazy. And it's impossible for these people to rely on self-conscious practice to increase their strength. Therefore, you must set a goal for them every once in a while. Let them complete it as a mission. This will increase the strength of Butian Pavilion. Yes, Wu Qianqian said. What stage are you at now? Chu Yang looked at Wu Qianqian. Third grade martial master. Wu Qianqian said somewhat embarrassedly. She didn't know that her progress was enough to make many people dumbfounded. Not bad, Chu Yang said. It was indeed not bad. The martial arts of Beyond the Heavens sect were known for their steady progress. It was impossible to improve quickly. Wu Qianqian's speed was already beyond Chu Yang's expectations. Wu Qianqian bit her lips and said, Chu Yang, I want strength. I want to advance quickly. Can you help me? She said awkwardly, I know you have many martial arts techniques. I want to improve myself quickly. The faster the better. I don't want to catch up with you, but I want to break into upper three heavens or upper three heavens when I miss you. I want to listen to your legends. Chu Yang pondered for a moment. Okay, I will choose for you. How could Chu Yang not want Wu Qianqian to improve her strength? That way, she would at least have the ability to protect herself. Then Chu Yang frowned and thought. He asked the sword spirit in his mind, is there a martial art suitable for women to practice? It's more powerful and faster to practice. The sword spirit was sitting cross-legged between the mysterious young jade and the mysterious jade crystal. He had recovered his spirit with the help of the mysterious young jade and the mysterious jade crystal. Moreover, he had made progress. He frowned when he heard Chu Yang's question. A martial art for women to practice? Well, don't talk about the ordinary ones. They are too slow. Chu Yang flatly rejected. Then there's only one. The sword spirit said, fortunately, my strength has improved greatly. So, I have remembered many things. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to answer your question. What? How about the mysterious Yin transformation? The sword spirit was clearly proud of himself. He looked as if he was presenting a treasure. Mysterious Yin transformation? Chu Yang was startled. Isn't that a devil martial art? Nonsense. The sword spirit angrily said. This is the most orthodox martial art. But someone tampered with the formula and reversed the meridians. So this martial art must absorb the power of a girl's mysterious Yin female body to practice. But I have the complete formula of the mysterious Yin transformation technique here. So that's how it is. Chu Yang touched his nose. I'm obviously ignorant and inexperienced compared to this 10,000-year-old monster. The sword spirit closed his eyes. Not long after, 3 old books fell out with a bang. Mysterious Yin Transformation Technique Turning Soldier Yin Step Mysterious Yin Transformation Technique. Chu Yang looked at these 3 books in his consciousness. He couldn't help but be speechless. He suddenly had a feeling that this spirit-scraping technique is a martial art treasure trove. Also, I must remind you that this mysterious Yin transformation technique will be faster if you use it with 7 Yin cold energy, or mysterious jade crystal. The sword spirit was obviously reluctant to part with the mysterious jade crystal. I understand. Chu Yang mischievously smiled. Since that's the case, you don't need to practice the martial arts of Beyond the Heavens sect. I'll teach you another one. Chu Yang's mind turned. Mysterious Yin transformation technique had caused a huge bloody disaster in the Chongtian continent thousands of years ago. Everyone thought that this was the most evil martial art. It's better not to tell Wu Qianqian my real name. I don't want to bring her endless trouble. What? Wu Qianqian's spirit was lifted. Ice Jade Divine Technique. Chu Yang rolled his eyes and said, I'll teach you the formula now. You must remember it well. Don't form it into words. This is the continent's top martial art. You'll be in big trouble if other people know about it. Okay. Wu Qianqian nodded vigorously. Her eyes shone. The continent's top martial art? That's great. I'll be able to close the distance between you and me. Wu Qianqian was extremely smart. She didn't need a long time to memorize the formula. Chu Yang was already thinking about the mysterious jade crystal. Sword spirit, how many mysterious jade crystals do I need? How many? The sword spirit rolled his eyes. You only need a small piece to wear. Why do you need a lot? Well, I'll take a small piece. Chu Yang looked at the space. The sword spirit was sitting cross-legged in a huge array of mysterious yang jade and mysterious jade crystal. He said, Will this array work for me? Of course it will. The sword spirit snorted. This is a yin-yang array. It can gather the purest spirit energy. Why didn't you tell me? Chu Yang asked angrily. I haven't recovered yet. The sword spirit felt somewhat guilty. He said, Moreover, you have so many good things. Why did you put them all outside to set up the array? You can't do this even if you want to die. What about the small ones? Chu Yang asked. The small ones also seemed to work. The sword spirit was helpless. He had no choice but to grab a finger-sized piece of mysterious yang jade and a piece of mysterious jade crystal. He kneaded them and made them into a strange shape. He rolled his eyes and said, I know you want to leave a way out for your confidant. Take them. Chu Yang was overjoyed. Chapter 393. This is for you. Chu Yang rummaged in his bosom and handed it over to Wu Qianqian. This is. Wu Qianqian was somewhat surprised. Wear this with you. It can double your practice speed, Chu Yang said vaguely. It's beautiful. Wu Qianqian didn't know what it was, but she felt comfortable holding it in her hand. It was slightly cold on one side and slightly warm on the other. However, the cold and warm seemed to be interchanging with each other. She looked at it fondly for a while. Then she put it away like a treasure. Practice well, Chu Yang said in a very encouraging manner. Wu Qianqian smiled sweetly. She didn't care about the secret manual. She cared about the fact that Chu Yang had finally given her a treasure. He had personally given it to her. This made Wu Qianqian's heart feel very sweet. Chu Yang didn't know that his Xianyin transformation and the Yin-Yang jade pendant would give birth to a terrifying character. That was because Chu Yang didn't know one thing. Even the sword spirit didn't know. Wu Qianqian had grown up in a place with 7 shades cold energy. Moreover, this extremely intelligent woman was born with the Xianyin female puppet body. The Xianyin transformation, as its name implied, could transform an ordinary woman's physique into a Xianyin female puppet body. Then it could display a terrifying power. However, Wu Qianqian didn't need this transformation. She could directly enter the Xianyin realm. This was like practicing martial arts or cultivating immortality. An ordinary person would start from the body. Then they would temper their bones and organs step by step. Then they would go from Hotian to Xiantian. After that, they would reach foundation establishment and become immortal. However, Wu Qianqian's body had already reached foundation establishment. She was just waiting to receive the bow. Her starting point was much higher than most people's. Everyone started from the flat ground. But Wu Qianqian started from the clouds. How could it be generalized? Although she wouldn't reach the level of the Master of Calamity Sword, she was more than 1 level higher than Chu Yang in terms of strength. Of course, Chu Yang didn't know this at the moment. This page was destined not to be peaceful. Suddenly, the lights of Di Wuqing Ro's army were extinguished. Iron Cloud's side became nervous. Then, a team of soldiers rushed towards Iron Cloud's camp like an angry dragon from the dark. Iron Cloud's side. The archers would quickly prepare, and the arrows would come down like rain. However, the Great Zhao's army suddenly changed its direction when it was still several hundred feet away from the Iron Cloud's military camp. Then it rolled up like a gale. Then it took a small detour and returned to its original position with a rumbling sound. So it was just a false alarm. Then the Great Zhao's army attacked from all directions. They attacked from the east and the west and attacked from every angle. However, this kind of harassment could turn into reality at any time, making it difficult for others to grasp. Di Wuqing Ro's harassment would be more effective the longer the battle line was stretched out. The soldiers of Iron Cloud had been harassed dozens of times in a row, and this had caused the soldiers of Iron Cloud to curse out loud. Some bad-tempered generals even began to curse. What the fuck? How could he let her sleep? Why don't you just charge over and start a fight? In the commander's tent, Tai Longcheng's expression was calm as he commanded. Now was not the time for a decisive battle. It would be really bad if he, the commander, was angered as well. As for Tai Butian, she had already gone to bed. His Majesty the Emperor had not been able to sleep well these past few days. Now he could finally have a good sleep. Di Wuqing Ro's harassment was endless. The sky had not yet brightened, but he had already attacked 40 to 50 times. Sometimes he would attack from 7 or 8 directions at the same time. Then, another wave of attack came as dawn approached. This time 4 troops came at the same time. Alarms sounded from 4 directions at the same time. The troops from the other 3 directions only harassed for a while, and then retreated. Everyone was used to this. They would only use the archers to resist for a while, and these people would retreat. But Gui's seemingly flat army did not retreat. They faced the rain of arrows, and madly rushed into the Iron Cloud's military camp with irresistible force. This was beyond everyone's expectations. The number of this cavalry wasn't very large. It was only about 2,000 or 3,000, but every one of them was brave and unstoppable. Iron Cloud's valiant soldiers couldn't even last 1 round in front of them. Moreover, the seemingly ordinary armor on their bodies was impervious to swords and spears. The arrows were shot, and issued a crisp sound of impact. Then they bounced back. They broke through the fences and the defensive positions. Then they split into small groups and scattered with a loud bang. They fell into the pit that had been dug earlier. Iron Cloud's troops were cheering when they heard an orderly roar. Then the warhorses fiercely jumped out of the pit and thrust out their spears like lightning. Screams were heard everywhere. The cavalry had split up and then suddenly converged into one. They were like an unstoppable flood as they rushed into the depths of Iron Cloud's army. Ironclad's high-ranking officers were furious. They mobilized their own troops to encircle and intercept them. Tai Longcheng stood on a high ground and looked at the Ironclad's troops from afar. He sighed and said, "Golden Horse Riders Department's reputation is well deserved." He paused for a moment and then said, "Diwu Qingro is willing to pay such a price." The other high-ranking officers nodded one after another. They looked at this troop with shock in their eyes. They thought of their own subordinates. How many times would our troops be able to withstand such an elite troop if we were caught off guard? This troop of Golden Horse Riders had rushed forward for a short distance, but it had turned into an iron wall in front of them. However, this troop of riders had suddenly changed direction. They had made a turn that an ordinary cavalry troop would never have been able to make, and they had slaughtered their way out from another direction. It didn't take long. It had only been half an hour. Smoke billowed and battle cries shook the sky. Dawn had arrived. This troop of riders had slaughtered their way out of this place, and had left behind a trail of blood and flesh. They had slaughtered their way out of Ironclad's tight defensive perimeter, and had returned to their main camp. They had killed around 2,000 of their 2,500 men. For Great Zhao, this was undoubtedly a glorious victory. Our Great Zhao is still invincible. Ironclad can't withstand a single blow from us. The morale of Great Zhao's army had suddenly soared. Tai Longcheng's eyes were profound as he watched the Golden Horse Riders leave. His face was calm. "Supreme Commander, why didn't we dispatch our elite troops to stop them in one fell swoop?" A general next to him was somewhat angry and puzzled. "This is Minister Chu's decision," Tai Longcheng indifferently said. "It's not the time to dispatch our elite troops." The dissatisfied generals suddenly became silent as soon as they heard that it was Minister Chu's decision. They remembered the arrogant king of Helchu, who had embarrassed Diwu Qingro in front of a 1,000,000-man army. King of Helchu's loud roar had silenced the entire 8,000,000-man army of the two countries. No one had dared to raise any objections. No one knew that Diwu Qingro had been standing alone on the roof of the Supreme Commander's tent that night. He had been looking at the twinkling stars in the sky. His face had turned ashen. Diwu Qingro had arrived here after he had arranged the assault strategy. He had been standing there for the entire night. The soldiers knew that Prime Minister Diwu had gone to sleep, but they didn't know that he hadn't slept at all. Why is this? Diwu Qingro tightly knitted his brows and muttered to himself. The stars had only blurred the mysteries of heaven the last time. But why did the universe suddenly turn upside down this time? Great Zhao, which was as bright as the sun, suddenly dimmed. And the Emperor Star of Ironclad had always been dim and obscure. But it had suddenly shone with boundless radiance. Diwu Qingro was puzzled. The last time I had seen the celestial phenomenon was when the two sides were entangled. It was obscure and difficult to understand. But it's so clear now. What happened during this period of time? Diwu Qingro was confused. He only felt that his thoughts were in a mess. He didn't know that Tai Butian would have been so ashamed that she would have been unable to show her face if he had asked her about it. After all, she had saved Chu Yang that night before dawn. The intelligence star has dimmed. A large number of military stars have fallen. The north is shining with red light. The south is bowing and surrendering to the north. But what's going on with this star? Diwu Qingro stared at the night sky. His brows knitted tighter and tighter. A star was shining in the sky within his observation range. It was emitting a dazzling brilliance. The nearby stars were dim and lightless. Perhaps they couldn't be seen at all. This was the Emperor Star. However, above this star, there was another star that shone brightly. The Emperor Star's incomparable brilliance was unable to suppress this star. Furthermore, the two stars didn't repel each other at all. Instead, they seemed to be getting along very well. The auxiliary star should have been below the Emperor Star. But why is this auxiliary star above the Emperor Star? The master is weak and the ministers are strong. This is a great calamity. But why is it so harmonious? The auxiliary star had never appeared before. So why did it suddenly appear this time? Could it be that this auxiliary star is King of Helchu? Diwu Qingro was distressed as he pondered. There's only one possibility for such a situation to occur. And that is, Something happened between King of Hell Chu and Tai Bu Tian. But what could have happened that could have caused such a huge change in the celestial phenomenon? The wisdom star has dimmed. Could it be that Diwu Qingro will face an unpredictable calamity? Diwu Qingro stood in a daze for a long time. He felt as if his thoughts were in a mess. He couldn't sort them out at all. This sudden change in the celestial phenomenon had thoroughly overturned Diwu Qingro's understanding of the celestial phenomenon. He felt as if his head was about to explode as he thought about it. The Emperor star is strong. It's clear that it's as bright as the sun. Since that's the case, it's the will of heaven. But the Emperor star had always been shining in Great Zhao before this. The red light and auspicious aura were clearly in Great Zhao. Why did it suddenly change? Isn't this change playing with me, Diwu Qingro, for the rest of my life? Diwu Qingro's face revealed endless frustration and anger. Heaven, why are you playing with me like this? The Emperor star has always been in the south for 25 years. But it suddenly shifted to the north at this decisive moment. This is the will of heaven. How can you make such a joke? Chapter 394. 25 years ago, Diwu Qingro had seen the celestial phenomenon. Therefore, he had shouldered the mission of his clan and had come to the lower three heavens with the ambition of unifying the world. Following the heavens' will was the way to success. How could Diwu Qingro have chosen the wrong side with the celestial phenomenon as a guide? Therefore, he had entered Great Zhao as he wished. He had slowly grasped power, and had eventually become an ambitious and ruthless person who could command the world by himself. However, the celestial phenomenon had suddenly changed at the time of the decisive battle. This was undoubtedly telling him, all your efforts are just a joke. You are being toyed with, that's all. The black celestial phenomenon you saw is fake. It's fake. The real thing has only appeared now. This was equivalent to toying with Diwu Qingro's life's work. Why would Diwu Qingro have sought refuge with Great Zhao if he had known that the heaven's will would eventually belong to Iron Cloud? He had suddenly changed his mind when he could no longer look back. Moreover, it was an irresistible heaven's will. How could this not make Diwu Qingro mentally and physically exhausted? Even if it's heaven's will, I will make heaven's will pay the price. However, Diwu Qingro's elegant beard was stained with blood. His eyes suddenly turned gloomy as he fiercely muttered to himself, even if I can't reverse it, I, Diwu Qingro, can't be humiliated. Even if heaven's will can't be reversed, I will bury these 8 million soldiers with me. I want the world to remember the name of Diwu Qingro. The armies of the two countries frequently killed each other in the next half-month. The war had reached a stalemate. Diwu Qingro's crafty schemes came out one after another. He created a diversion in the east and attacked in the west. It seemed as if his ingenious schemes were endless. Ironcloud had Tai Longcheng, Tai Butian, and King of Hell Chu on their side. Diwu Qingro's strategy could be described as unfathomable. His insight into the war situation was so keen that it made people's hearts cold. Diwu Qingro had the overall situation under his control. He wantonly dispatched his army. The Golden Horse Riders Department's army was especially unpredictable. Diwu Qingro knew that his original arrangement was useless now that King of Hell Chu had returned. They would only be defeated by the enemy if they were to disperse. Therefore, he formed another army under Jing Menghun's command. The lethality of this army became even more terrifying. There were dozens of battles every day, but there was no sign of a decisive battle. Tai Longcheng, Tai Butian, and Chu Yang had been forced to separate under his immense pressure. He confronted Diwu Qingro. However, during this period of time, Chu Yang had fallen into a strange state of mind. Things started half a month ago. Ever since Chu Yang had given Wu Qingqing the secret manual, she had been allowed to cultivate it by herself. But on the night of the next 2 days, Wu Qingqing came to Chu Yang's tent uneasily. She wanted to say something but hesitated. What is it? Chu Yang asked. Chu Yang, I seem to have broken through. Wu Qingqing was a little uncertain. With some fear and helplessness she said, I know I didn't act recklessly. I just followed the mental cultivation method of the Ice Jade Divine Technique and then I discovered The bottleneck of this mental cultivation method, I didn't feel it, but I advanced to the 4th grade of martial master. Huh? Chu Yang's eyes widened. Let me see. Even if you are a genius, you can't be this fast. Chu Yang grabbed Wu Qingqing's wrist. His energy entered her body and circled around her meridians. He didn't find any abnormalities. Unwilling to give up, he probed again. Again, he only found vigorous vitality. There is no problem. Chu Yang withdrew his hand and scratched his head. No problem. Wu Qingqing was a little uneasy. Then should I continue cultivating? Cultivate. You should be happy that your strength has increased. Why are you panicking? Chu Yang said. He thought to himself, it seems that she was already on the verge of breaking through the 3rd grade of martial master. Chuan, now is the time for a breakthrough. Yes, it must be like this. Then on the next night, Wu Qingqing came again. She wanted to say something but hesitated. What is it? Chu Yang asked. This Chuan, I seem to have broken through again. Wu Qingqing stammered. Huh? Chu Yang was shocked. What grade is it now? Could it be that she advanced from 4th grade to 5th grade in one day? Isn't this too fast? Martial master grade. Wu Qingqing was flustered. She wanted to cry. What is going on? How can I break through with just one practice? Could there be a problem? Chu Yang was dumbfounded. After a thorough examination, Chu Yang was sure that there was nothing wrong with Wu Qingqing's body. Moreover, the Xianin revolving technique was also operating normally. He was finally sure. There is nothing wrong. Wu Qingqing left with a heavy heart. Chu Yang also sat down with a heavy heart. So strange. She broke through with just one practice. She broke through with just one practice? Chu Yang was thinking. What is going on? This girl didn't eat any treasures. Wu Qingqing didn't come for 3 days. Chu Yang also let out a sigh of relief. But on that day, after dealing with Diwu Qingrou's attack, Wu Qingqing came again. Chu Yang. What? Chu Yang raised his eyebrows. You didn't break through this time? I broke through to martial great master. Huh. Minister Chu staggered and almost fell to the ground. Chu Yang had always shocked others with his cultivation speed. Now he finally had a taste of it himself. In half a month, Wu Qingqing and big sister Wu Qingqing rushed to martial great master grade unstoppably. Towards the end, Chu Yang was shocked until he was numb. It was really too fierce. Later, Chu Yang really couldn't sit still and asked the sword spirit. Then the sword spirit was also shocked. He asked Chu Yang to call Wu Qingqing over and let him take her pulse. After that, the sword spirit was speechless for a long time. What's wrong? Chu Yang asked anxiously. I can't help it. This is really... The sword spirit said speechlessly. This is really heaven's will. Heaven's will? Chu Yang blinked. This Miss Wu Qingqing actually has the Xian defense body, which is rarely seen in 10,000 years. The sword spirit said speechlessly, and I originally had a few female cultivation techniques here. But for convenience, I took out the one beside me. And this is the most powerful one. Chu Yang asked in confusion. Why? Is it inappropriate? It's not that it's inappropriate, but this technique is completely tailor-made for her. The sword spirit didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You still remember the name of this technique? Xianin transformation? Pill. It's the Xianin transformation. The sword spirit sighed. Only after the transformation can one form the Xianin female body. And this confidant of yours was actually born with the Xianin body. What do you think is wrong? Chu Yang sucked in a breath of cold air. You mean she omitted the transfer procedure? The sword spirit nodded speechlessly. That's right. She started cultivating the Xianin qi. For her, the first half of this technique is equivalent to a smooth path. There are no bottlenecks at all. She just needs to circulate the technique and she can easily advance. Asterisk asterisk. Chu Yang's eyes widened and he couldn't help but swear. Because of his agitation, he actually said this sentence. And at this time, Chu Yang was still taking Wu Qingqing's pulse. This was equivalent to holding her hand and saying, "Fuck. What kind of image was this?" Wu Qingqing's face immediately turned red. She fiercely rolled her eyes at him and raised her eyebrows. What did you say? I cough. Chu Yang coughed awkwardly and hurriedly tried to salvage the situation. I said, Fuck after fuck, my martial power might not be as high as yours, humph. Wu Qingqing rolled her eyes at him. She didn't know what this guy was thinking, so she didn't argue with him. But her face became redder and redder. In Chu Yang's mind, the sword spirit was already laughing. You're such a hooligan. It's all your fault. Chu Yang flew into a rage out of humiliation. He said fiercely, continue. Her advancement now is equivalent to the female Xianin Qi in her meridians being completely transformed into Xianin Qi. It's almost over. But after that, she has the yin-yang dual jades in her body. She also has the Xianin body and can cultivate Xian Qi. This progress can only be described as terrifying. What's the highest level of achievement? Chu Yang asked. Can she become a martial emperor? Martial emperor? The sword spirit disdainfully curled his lips. Martial emperor is nothing. Martial monarch. Martial monarch? Nothing. Asterisk asterisk. Martial saint? Chu Yang's eyes had already turned into bells. Martial fate. The sword spirit muttered. Chu Yang thought that he was going to say martial saint again. Nothing. At this time, the sword spirit finally opened his mouth. If she doesn't break down halfway and by chance she should be able to cultivate to martial saint or even higher. It should be possible. But this path is full of difficulties and obstacles. It's easier said than done for a woman to cultivate all the way to the top. Chu Yang was stunned. Martial saint and even higher? Wouldn't that make her a supreme martial artist? His heart automatically ignored the last two sentences. It's a pity that the person who created the revolving Xian technique didn't cultivate to the supreme martial artist level. So, at the final stage, if she wants to go further, she can only create it herself. The sword spirit sighed. Because the creator of this technique, the Xianin martial fate, didn't have the Xianin body at the beginning of cultivation, Chu Yang was finally really shocked. Coming back to his senses, he looked at Wu Qingqing, whose face was full of anticipation and uneasiness. He sighed and said, "There's nothing wrong with the technique you're cultivating." But, when Wu Qingqing heard him say but, her heart jumped. She asked, "What's wrong?" "But it's too compatible with your physique. That's why your cultivation speed is so fast." Chu Yang warned seriously after this, "Don't let anyone test your physique. Also, don't tell anyone about the technique you're cultivating. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult for you to grow." "I understand." Wu Qingqing nodded firmly. She asked with a face full of expectation, "Can I cultivate to the martial king level with this technique?" Because in her opinion, the lowest standard to enter the upper three heavens was the martial king level. So she was very concerned about this martial king level. Martial king level. Chu Yang wanted to say, maybe you'll be a martial king level after cultivating for half a year. But after thinking about it, he didn't say it. He said, absolutely. And it'll be very fast as long as you work hard enough. I'll work hard. Wu Qingqing clenched her small fist. Chapter 395. Sword Spirit heaved a long sigh and said, "But you have to go to the upper three heavens or the lower three heavens to reach a certain level. But you can't improve in the lower three heavens." Chu Yang frowned. He looked at the pleasantly surprised Wu Qingqing and said, "I will ask for her opinion when the time comes." Wu Qingro had been venting his energy like a madman during this stalemate. Ironcloud could only passively defend. Tai Longcheng felt that this super abnormal phenomenon was very inconceivable. The wind doesn't last forever. The rain doesn't last forever. Wu Qingro understood this principle. He would get tired and take a break from his indiscriminate bombardment. But Ironcloud would counterattack at that time, and Wu Qingro would feel very uncomfortable. Why would this wise man of his generation make such an obvious mistake? Chu Yang didn't feel anything about this. He only calmly looked at his 300,000-strong army. Chu Yang was like an immovable mountain no matter how Wu Qingro bombarded indiscriminately. He was sure that Wu Qingro had a plan. Wu Qingro's decisive battle would come when the dagger would be revealed. Moreover, this was a battle tactic. Both sides were tired. Great Zhao's soldiers were physically tired, but their spirits were high. They could see that their mortal enemy could only let go, and they could attack to their heart's content. As a soldier, this was incomparable to their spirit. On the other hand, Ironclad's side was sullen and depressed. They could only withdraw and defend in the face of the enemy's indiscriminate bombardment. They had to use all their strength to prevent their position from being destroyed. How could they not be sullen? But they couldn't act blindly without thinking. Wu Qingrou's army would fiercely gather once there was a gap in the defensive line. Then they would expand the gap and attack the entire army. Everyone could see this clearly. This was because every time they attacked, they would send out 3 troops from different directions. 2 of the troops would be on the lookout, while the last one would charge and attack. It was obvious that as long as there was even the slightest mistake on your side, the other 2 troops would immediately join in and tear apart the gap. The other attacking troops would have an opportunity to take advantage of the situation if they were to deploy troops from other barracks. Wu Qingrou's battle tactic was crazy and effective. Chu Yang had a faint feeling. Wu Qingrou seems to be deliberately forcing the armies of the 2 countries to a point of eruption. Once they are at the end of their rope, they will fight to the death. Chu Yang had this realization, but he couldn't believe it. Why? Wu Qingrou had no reason to do this. Therefore, he could only slowly continue to speculate, and then steadily deal with the storm-like harassment and attacks of Great Zhao's army. The Great Zhao's army had arrived like a gust of wind. Then they would disperse like an ebbing tide after a short period of time. And it seemed as if they didn't know what fatigue was. However, the Golden Horse Riders Department's attack that Chu Yang was looking forward to didn't appear. Minister, our army's morale is somewhat unstable. Chu Yang was in the tent when Wu Kuangyun walked in with large strides. He looked somewhat anxious. Everyone is feeling very depressed. If this goes on, when will it end? Is it our brother's morale that is unstable? Or is it your morale that is unstable? Chu Yang raised his head and looked at him. Actually, I just came to ask if Duan, the commander-in-chief and His Majesty had any instructions. Wu Kuangyun's dark face turned red. Wait. Chu Yang suddenly felt that the morale of the army would plummet if this continued. Wu Kuangyun had a bad temper. But he was also a famous general in the army. So, how could the ordinary troops remain calm if even he was like this? Therefore, some measures must be taken. Chu Yang rolled his eyes. He beckoned Wu Kuangyun to come closer and said, after you go down, do this and this. When the Great Zhao's army comes again, do this and this. Wu Kuangyun beamed with joy. He nodded repeatedly. Then, he gave Chu Yang a thumbs up in admiration. Then he walked away like a gust of wind. Wu Qingqing couldn't help but tremble behind Chu Yang. She thought, this Chu Yang is really mischievous. He doesn't forget to play pranks in such a battle. That night, a howl was heard along with the sound of hoof beats. The Great Zhao's army was like a pack of wild wolves. At this moment, the Ironclad's army suddenly burst into laughter. Ha ha ha, this gang of idiots is here again. Look, this gang of idiots is running back and forth like dogs every night. It's really fucking cool. Brothers, come out and watch the show. Yes, we are just sitting here and waiting for this gang of idiots to act. Motherfucker, it's really cool. It costs money to go to the theater, but it's free here. The Ironclad's army suddenly swept away the depressing and dispirited mood of the past few days, along with the expansion of this discussion. Everyone started to clamor. Then the army of thousands of people started to shout loudly, stupid C** and T. You guys are here. Idiots, are you tired? The Great Zhao's army had arrived with great momentum, but they were met with such treatment. They immediately flew into a rage. They fought for a while and both sides suffered casualties. Then they retreated. Then they heard howls behind them. Idiots! Are you leaving again? Idiots, come back earlier. The Great Zhao's general almost fell off his horse. What's more, under the leadership and encouragement of Wu Kuangyun, this group of straightforward men worked together to compose a song within half a day. Then they promoted it throughout the entire army. The song was called Idiots, Are You Tired? The lyrics were as follows: Idiots, are you tired of being driven like a dog every night? Idiots, can you ride a horse? Can you fight a war? Are you tired of being treated like a toy all night? Idiots, are you tired? Oh hey idiots, although you are bitter, although you are tired, But our hearts are comforted by your hardships every day. Oh, idiots, you are bitter, you are tired. Idiots, you are a good treasure for us to relax. A good treasure. Thump, 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 thump. Therefore, when the great Zhao's army came again that night, everyone was busy fighting the enemy, but they also built an earthen platform. On the earthen platform there was a military band of several thousand people. The gongs and drums sounded together, and under the command of the band, 3,000 burly men simultaneously raised their thick necks, and opened their wolf-like voices, and began to sing in a grand and majestic voice, "Idiot! Idiot! Are you tired?" The surrounding area was heavily guarded. In fact, there was even a special group of guards. Therefore, the singers were only in charge of shouting as loudly as they could. Their voices were like thunder. This was rehearsed. Tens of millions of people were shouting and singing at the same time, and this suppressed the sounds of tens of thousands of people fighting. Therefore, the good Cloud's army was grinning from ear to ear. They were happy as they killed the enemy. Some of them were seriously injured, but they were crying out in pain and laughing at the same time. They were very happy. There was very little entertainment in the military camp, so everyone was in high spirits now that there was such a good program. Many people were waving their sabers while singing along with the melody. The great Zhao's surprise troops were so angry that their bellies almost burst. They even abandoned their original plan and attacked the earthen platform full of singers. But this operation led to the complete annihilation of the entire army. There were casualties after the battle, but everyone was in high spirits. The usual depressing atmosphere after a battle was swept away. Even the great Zhao's mouths were humming. They were actually looking forward to the great Zhao's idiots' attack that night. Minister Chu's invention had thoroughly solved many problems for the Iron Cloud's army. In just one night, the entire 3 camps of the Iron Cloud were singing, "Idiots, are you tired?" Idiots singing. The singing became louder and louder, and everyone was fighting with more vigor. There was a soldier who had been slashed in the chest by the enemy, but he tilted his head, looked at the enemy soldier, and said with a smile, "Idiots, are you tired? Do you know how comforting I am?" These words enraged the great Zhao's soldier. He ferociously rushed forward. "I'll let you comfort me." However, this Iron Cloud soldier had a carefree smile on his face. He pulled out a saber from his chest and stabbed it into his enemy's heart. Iron Cloud had been on the defensive side of this night's offensive and defensive battle, and they had gained the complete upper hand. Moreover, several enemy troops had been left behind, and they had been completely annihilated. In the commander's tent, Tai Long Chung was slapping his thighs and rocking back and forth. He couldn't stop laughing. He smacked his lips. "Fuck. This king of Hell Chu is really high." Tai Jitian was on one side. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She was speechless. What could she say? She had nothing to say about Chu Yang's pranks, especially when it came to pranks that only had benefits and no harm. Tai Butian could only choose to cover her ears and not listen. She could only smile bitterly. Tai Jitian had a clear understanding of this. Men are born with a strong tendency to swear. But Tai Butian wasn't in the mood to think about this matter. She was thinking about another problem. A very serious problem. This problem made her flustered. Great Zhao's barracks. Diwu Qingrou's face was serious. He looked a little pale. This situation. Where did it first come from? It came from Wu Kuangyun's barracks. That bastard. The general's face was full of hatred. Wu Kuangyun. Diwu Qingrou chuckled. His eyes flashed with a cold light. That's right. According to our previous estimates, King of Hell Chu should be in charge of Wu Kuangyun's army. He smiled faintly. Now it's exactly the same as my estimates. King of Hell Chu should be in charge of Wu Kuangyun's army. Such a strategy is vulgar and seems naive, but it has a strong effect on raising the morale of the troops. This isn't something that Wu Kuangyun can come up with. King of Hell Chu is behind this. Diwu Qingrou came to an unquestionable conclusion. The generals were dumbfounded. King of Hell Chu? Prime Minister, what should we do next? The generals asked in unison. Mingui, are you ready? Diwu Qingrou asked. Chapter 396. Good. Diwu Qingrou's eyes flashed with a ruthless light as he said. In that case, tonight's raid will be the last time. Dispatch the Golden Horse Riders Department and give Ironcloud a heavy blow. Then immediately withdraw the troops. Withdraw the troops. The generals turned pale with fright. Yes, withdraw the troops. Once the raid is over, immediately withdraw the troops. Leave the tents here. Don't touch anything else. It's enough to completely withdraw the troops, Di Wuqingro said casually. Yes, the generals didn't understand, but they knew that Di Wuqingro had a brilliant plan. Their blind trust in Di Wuqingro made them execute his orders without hesitation. Order the infantry to withdraw immediately. When the cavalry comes back, wrap the horses' hooves with cotton and quietly withdraw. Di Wuqingro added. Make sure no one knows. Prime Minister, isn't this too hasty? If we hastily withdraw, we will have to go over this mountain. And once this mountain is occupied by the enemy, it will mean that our 10 years of expeditions will be in vain. Moreover, Ironcloud will have one more natural stronghold. This will be very detrimental to Great Zhao's unification plan. The Heavenly Dragon General Yuhan frowned. Dragon General Li Yi also nodded on the side. He agreed with His Majesty and Yuhan's words. Hasty, it must be hasty. If everything needs to be planned before acting, I'm afraid Ironcloud will react at that time. Especially King of Hell Chu. I'm afraid the entire strategy will change once he reacts. Di Wuqingro's eyes flashed as he said, Yuhan, you should know what I mean about this retreat. Why are you still asking? But the military's morale will inevitably be shaken. Moreover, if we attack back, the casualties will be very heavy. It will be equivalent to perishing together with the enemy. Yuhan's thin face was somewhat heavy and sad. The Golden Horse Riders Department had been constantly making arrangements. How could Yuhan not know what they were doing? Yuhan's body was covered in cold sweat when he saw those vicious arrangements. The enemy had fallen into the trap. But his side didn't have much protection. It was bound to perish together. How could this heavenly dragon, who had always loved his troops, feel comfortable? Therefore, for the first time in his life, he questioned Di Wuqingro's orders. You only need to carry out the orders. Di Wuqingro looked at him gently and said, Yuhan, sacrifices are inevitable in war. Yuhan heaved a long sigh. That night, Great Zhao's attack was even more ferocious. It seemed as if they were covering the sky and covering the earth. Moreover, they didn't stop for the entire night. However, Ironcloud's side had already recovered. Moreover, along with this violent attack, it clearly conveyed a thought. It seems that this kind of attack is about to stop. Tai Longcheng was in the commander's tent. His brows wrinkled as he listened to the sounds of the heaven-shaking bandits outside. Several of his trusted generals were by his side. Di Wuqingro's attack had stopped. This meant that the time for Ironcloud to counterattack had arrived. Therefore, the generals could not wait any longer. It won't be that simple. Tai Longcheng faintly felt that Di Wuqingro definitely had more tricks up his sleeve. He waved his hand and said, Let's wait until dawn. In the face of Di Wuqingro's unpredictable strategy, Tai Longcheng did not dare to take any risks. He would rather give up this great opportunity than act blindly without thinking. In addition, immediately report this situation to His Majesty and Minister Chu. Let's see what they have to say. Tai Longcheng made a decision. If the enemy retreats after dawn, and His Majesty and Minister Chu have no objections, we will immediately pursue an attack. On the other side, Chu Yang had been standing on the top of the flagpole when the chaos had just started. He had been quietly watching for a while. Then, he had come down with a heavy expression on his face. If he had guessed correctly, perhaps Di Wuqingro would reveal his true intentions tonight. However, he did not know what kind of arrangements this ambitious and ruthless man would make. He came down and saw Wu Qianqian standing beside the commander's tent. She was dressed in black. Her long hair and sleeves were fluttering in the wind. Tonight should come to an end, Wu Qingqing said in a low voice. Huh. Chu Yang looked at her. I can feel Di Wuqingro's determination in this attack, Wu Qingqing casually said. There are 3 reasons. First, Di Wuqingro did not prepare an army camp tonight. Second, Di Wuqingro's total number of troops is close to 1 million if we calculate according to the number of troops he has invested. This is equivalent to a semi-decisive battle. However, it is taking place in the dark night. So people can't feel the flavor of a decisive battle. As for the last reason, it is my feeling. Chu Yang looked at Wu Qingqing with some gratification. Wu Qingqing could see this point. It showed that she had matured in all aspects. She could take charge of a whole area alone. Especially the last sentence that Wu Qingqing had said with a very certain tone. My feeling. It was a kind of telepathy that belonged to a decision-making person. This was already an outstanding and powerful ability, especially when the opponent was Di Wuqingro. This was even rarer. What would you do if you were Di Wuqingro? Chu Yang probed. If I were him, I would immediately attack after tonight's decisive battle if I could expand the results of the battle. If I couldn't, I would retreat immediately. Although this battlefield is big, it can't accommodate 8 million people at the same time. 1 million for each side is already the limit. Tonight is a semi-decisive battle. However, it will decide the outcome of the battle and the direction of the war. Can't happen tonight, and it certainly can't happen in the future. Therefore, I would retreat and plan slowly. I would conserve my forces and make a comeback. This is the best plan. Wu Qingqing paused and said, however, the elite cavalry of Golden Horse Riders Department hasn't appeared yet. This is my concern. If they don't appear, Di Wuqingro will have other ideas. If they appear and can't capture Ironclad's camp by daybreak, they will retreat. You've seen half of it. Chu Yang looked at her happily. He praised, but it's already not easy. The only half that I haven't seen is Di Wuqingro's character and Di Wuqingro's insidious arrangements. Di Wuqingro is not a person who gives up easily. If he wants to give up, there must be a reason. If he wants to withdraw, there must be a backup plan. Chu Yang said slowly, therefore, even if Di Wuqingro wants to withdraw, it will only be a trap. Trap? Wu Qingqing asked in confusion. Yes, have you seen the camps of both sides? Chu Yang asked himself in his heart. At the same time, he recalled Di Wuqingro's arrangements on the roof of the Prime Minister's manor. He slowly calculated. His words also became more and more intermittent as he continued to calculate. Our Ironclad side has a majestic pass to the north and steep mountains on both sides. We can attack and retreat. Moreover, we don't have to worry about the rear. But Di Wuqingro only needs to break through from the front. His path will be smooth. Yes. Wu Qingqing looked at Chu Yang in bewilderment. She thought, isn't this something that everyone knows? But look at Di Wuqingro's tough self. He has clearly put out a dragon coiling and tiger entrenched in the wind. Looking from afar, it looked like a huge dragon was coiling over, but it was holding its head high. Moreover, behind the dragon's body is a tiger's body. When the dragon moves, the wind and clouds gather. When the tiger roars, the fierce tiger comes down from the mountain. This is the posture of swallowing Ironclad in one fell swoop. This proves that Di Wuqingro has made up his mind to fight when he came here. How can he retreat so easily? Chu Yang frowned. He seemed to be asking Wu Qingqing, but also seemed to be asking himself. But there is one thing that is very strange. Originally, Great Zhao's camp was further forward. But after Di Wuqingro arrived, they unknowingly retreated 18 miles. Most of the main camp spread to the flat slope halfway up the mountain. Moreover, it changed from a horizontal formation to a square formation. In other words, after Di Wuqingro arrived, it became a dragon coiling and tiger entrenched camp. This shows that Di Wuqingro wants to take advantage of the terrain. Chu Yang rubbed his eyebrows and said with difficulty. He paused every time he said a sentence. It was as if he was pouring out his heart and lungs to analyze. This kind of analysis consumed a lot of energy. It was unimaginable. Especially analyzing the thoughts of the ambitious and ruthless Di Wuqingro. It was even more difficult. Setting up camp at the back of the mountain means that Great Zhao has an endless supply of food. This is a safe method. Moreover, by retreating 18 miles, we can avoid the exhaustion of transporting grain. How can this be called a conspiracy? Wu Qingqing frowned in contemplation and raised an objection. You did not see the terrain clearly. Chu Yang pulled Wu Qingqing into the tent and came to the sand table. Pointing at the terrain on the sand table, he said, "Look, Di Wuqingro set up camp here. It is foolproof. Look at the mountain behind him. The terrain of the mountain. It's very flat. This is also the condition created for the supply team. Even if we retreat, there will be no danger. This is a perfect plan. Wu Qingqing stared at the sand table with her pretty eyes. What if this mountain is Iron Cloud's team? Chu Yang pointed at the mountain and asked, if Iron Cloud's team is there, then attacking Di Wuqing Ro would be as easy as blowing off dust. Wu Qingqing was very puzzled. How could Iron Cloud's team appear there? If they could, then the war would have ended long ago. This mountain is not high, but the terrain is very flat. There is no big slope. It is suitable for cavalry to charge. If the infantrymen are on high ground, they can display 3 times the fighting strength. As for the archers, spear throwers, knife throwers, and axe throwers, it is the best place to use their skills. Once they attack from the top of the mountain and attack Di Wuqing Ro's camp, they will be meat on the chopping board. They can be slaughtered at will. Even turning around and running away will become an extravagant hope, because running away in a hurry will not be as fast as the opponent's speed. Chu Yang spoke faster and faster. If Di Wuqing Ro deliberately creates a situation where they run away in panic, will we chase after them? Of course we will chase. Wu Qingqing said without hesitation. But what if Di Wuqing Ro set up an ambush on the top of the mountain? Chu Yang asked. When our army enters Iron Cloud's camp to collect supplies, they will suddenly attack like a tiger coming down from the mountain. Wu Qingqing suddenly broke out in cold sweat. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.